Welcome back to the Cheating Tales Lab. First of all, a huge thank you for helping us reach 5,000 subscribers. Thank you all for your amazing support. To celebrate, we're launching our second channel, Infidelity Tales Lab, where you'll get one-day early access to all our stories plus exclusive, original cheating wife stories you won't find anywhere else. You can subscribe now by clicking the link in the description or the pinned comment, or simply search for Infidelity Tales Lab on YouTube. Don't miss out. Subscribe and listen to exclusive stories. You won't regret subscribing. Now let's begin the story. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the immaculate kitchen of the Clark residence as Nathan observed the caterers setting up for his son Spencer's graduation party. Standing at 6 feet 2 inches with steel gray eyes and the composed demeanor that had served him well through countless surgeries, Nathan reached for his coffee while maintaining a careful watch on the scene unfolding before him. The head caterer approached him with a clipboard. "Dr. Clark, where would you like the seafood station?" "The west side of the pool area should work well," Nathan replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had earned him respect in both the operating room and boardroom. "Just ensure it's under the awning to avoid direct sunlight." Through the kitchen window, he caught sight of his wife Marilyn directing the decoration team. 25 years of marriage had taught him to read the subtle tells in her movements, the slightly too precise gestures, the artificial brightness of her smile. At 52, Marilyn still turned heads with her tennis-toned figure and carefully maintained appearance, but Nathan had long since learned to see past the polished surface. "Nathan?" Marilyn's voice carried that familiar edge of urgency as she swept into the kitchen, her designer sundress rustling. "Could you help with the decorations inside? The living room still needs attention." Before Nathan could respond, his brother Howard emerged from the pool area, his casual demeanor just a shade too calculated. "I've got the backyard handled," Howard added quickly, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "Those string lights won't hang themselves." Nathan nodded, maintaining his neutral expression even as his hand brushed against the phone in his pocket. The device silently recorded, a practice he'd adopted over the past year on the advice of Clay Maloney, the ex-military security consultant who'd first raised concerns about irregular patterns in Marilyn's behavior and suspicious financial transactions. "Dr. Clark?" Sarah Chun, one of the nurses from his practice, approached with a stack of paperwork. "I hate to interrupt, but these surgical schedules need your approval before Monday." "Of course, Sarah." Nathan gestured toward the kitchen island, noting how Marilyn's smile tightened at the interruption. "Let's review them now." As Sarah spread out the documents, Nathan caught the flash of irritation that crossed Howard's face. His brother had always been the more personable one, content with his role as hospital administrator while Nathan pursued his surgical career. Now, watching Howard's hand brush against Marilyn's arm in what might appear to be an innocent gesture, Nathan reflected on how that congeniality had served as the perfect cover. "Dad," Spencer's voice carried across the kitchen as he bounded in, all 6 feet of youthful energy barely contained in his graduation suit. "Can you help me with something?" "It's about the medical school application." Nathan studied his son's face, so like his own, or so he'd always thought. "What's on your mind?" "It's the personal statement," Spencer began, leading Nathan toward his study. "I want to mention the volunteer work at the hospital, but I'm not sure how to frame it." Through the study window, Nathan had a clear view of the pool area. He watched as Howard reappeared, moving with too much familiarity in a space that wasn't his home. The security cameras Clay had installed 6 months ago would be capturing every moment. "Spencer," Nathan said carefully, "why don't you tell me about the hospital volunteering?" "All of it." His son shifted uncomfortably. "What do you mean?" "The hours you logged when I was in surgery. The time you spent with Uncle Howard." Spencer's phone buzzed, his girlfriend Katie's name flashing on the screen. "I should take this," he muttered, relief evident in his voice as he stepped out of the study. Nathan returned to the kitchen, timing his movements precisely. The caterers had moved outside, leaving the space momentarily empty. Through the window, he watched as Howard pulled Marilyn close behind a decorative trellis, their kiss speaking of years of practiced deception. Nathan's hand tightened on his coffee cup, but his expression remained impassive. 20 years of performing high-stakes surgery had taught him the value of steady hands and careful timing. Marilyn's laugh carried across the yard, sharp and triumphant. 20 years of family vacations, and you really thought we were just close in-laws, she was saying to Howard, unaware of Nathan's presence at the window. The best cover is hiding in plain sight, Howard replied, his hand lingering on her waist. Nathan was always too busy saving lives to notice what was happening in his own home. They turned, finally spotting Nathan at the window. Instead of shame or guilt, Marilyn's expression showed only arrogant satisfaction. "Well," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the open window, "I suppose the charade can finally end. Even the kids call him Daddy when you're not around." Nathan? Spencer appeared beside Nathan, his face a mix of defiance and guilt. "Sorry, Dad, but we had to choose sides a long time ago. Uncle Howard was always there while you were at the hospital. He came to my games, helped with homework." Nathan smiled, reaching into his jacket pocket where Clay's USB drive sat heavy with evidence. "Interesting choice," he said quietly, his tone making Spencer take an involuntary step back. "Let's discuss your definition of family." "Oh, please," Marilyn scoffed, striding into the kitchen with Howard close behind. "Are we really going to have a scene at Spencer's graduation party? How typically dramatic of you, Nathan." "Dramatic?" Nathan's voice remained level as he turned to face them. "I'd say 20 years of systematic deception is rather dramatic, wouldn't you, Howard? Although I suppose managing two families must have required quite the performance." Howard's face reddened. "You don't know what you're talking about. You were never here, always at the hospital, always in surgery. Someone had to be there for Marilyn, for Spencer. Someone had to help themselves to my family, you mean?" Nathan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "And my accounts? The offshore transfers were a nice touch. Did you think being hospital administrator meant I wouldn't notice the financial irregularities?" "You're delusional," Marilyn snapped, but her hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass. "Howard has been more of a husband and father than you ever were." "Has he?" Nathan removed his phone from his pocket, playing a recording. Howard's voice filled the kitchen, discussing account numbers and transfer dates with Marilyn. Spencer's face paled. "Mom? What's he talking about?" "Your mother and uncle have been very busy," Nathan said calmly. "But then, you've known that for years, haven't you, Spencer? Those summer internships at the hospital weren't just about padding your medical school application." "You bastard," Howard snarled, taking a step forward. "You've been spying on us?" "Gathering evidence," Nathan corrected. "There's a difference. Though I suppose ethics was never your strong suit, brother." Marilyn's laugh turned bitter. "And what are you going to do with this supposed evidence? Ruin your son's graduation party? Destroy our family's reputation?" "Our family?" Nathan's voice carried a dangerous edge. "No, Marilyn. This stopped being our family a long time ago. You made your choice." He turned to Spencer. "And so did you." "Dad, please," Spencer began, but Nathan cut him off. "Save it. The party's over." Nathan moved toward the door, his voice carrying clearly. "Enjoy your celebration. Tomorrow, we begin discussing consequences." The silence that followed him was broken only by the sound of Marilyn's wine glass shattering against the kitchen floor. Nathan walked to his car, his steps measured and calm. In his pocket, his phone continued recording, capturing the panicked conversation that erupted behind him. Clay was waiting in a black SUV across the street, his military training evident in his alert posture. "Everything recorded, Dr. Clark?" "Every word." Nathan slid into the passenger seat. "Contact Morrison. Tell him to prepare the legal documents for tomorrow morning. 8 a.m. sharp," Clay confirmed, starting the engine. "The security team will have the house monitored all night." Nathan nodded, watching through the tinted windows as Howard emerged from the house, gesturing angrily as he spoke on his phone. 20 years of betrayal would end with precision timing, just like every surgery Nathan had ever performed. "One more thing," Nathan added as they pulled away from the curb. "Contact the hospital board. I think it's time for an emergency meeting about financial irregularities in the administration." The next morning dawned clear and bright, a sharp contrast to the storm about to break. Nathan arrived at precisely 8 a.m., Morrison's leather briefcase in one hand and Clay's USB drive in the other. Marilyn answered the door in her silk robe, her careful makeup not quite hiding the signs of a sleepless night. What's this? Her hand trembled as she took the envelope Nathan held out. Divorce papers, he replied calmly, sliding the USB drive across the kitchen counter. And this contains 20 years of surveillance footage, phone recordings, and bank transfers. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the money moving to offshore accounts? You can't prove anything, Marilyn snapped, but her face had gone pale as she stared at the drive. Every family vacation, every business trip with Howard, Spencer's college fund transfers. It's all there. Nathan stood, straightening his suit jacket. You have 1 hour to leave the house. The locks change at 9. You can't do this. Marilyn's voice rose. This is my home. Was your home? Nathan corrected. Morrison will explain the temporary restraining order. I'd suggest reading it carefully, especially the part about electronic communications and financial transactions. I'll fight you, she hissed. Howard and I both will. You'll lose everything. Nathan paused at the door, looking back at the woman he'd once loved. No, Marilyn, you already lost everything. You just didn't know it until now. As he walked to his car, Nathan heard Marilyn's angry sobs through the open window, but his steps didn't falter. In the surgical theater, hesitation meant death. In life, he'd learned, it meant something worse, the slow death of dignity and self-respect. His phone buzzed, a text from Clay confirming that Howard had just received similar papers at his home. Nathan smiled as he started his car. The first incision had been made. Now it was time to excise the cancer that had grown in his life, with the same precision he'd used to save countless patients. The war was just beginning, but Nathan Clark had never lost a battle he was prepared for. And he'd been preparing for this one for a very long time. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across Ian McKinney's polished conference table as Howard paced the room. 1 week had passed since Nathan's devastating revelation, and the hospital administrator's usually confident demeanor had given way to barely contained panic. He is everything, Howard muttered, running his hands through his disheveled hair. The recordings, the transfers. Sit down, McKinney commanded, his reputation for aggressive divorce tactics evident in his shark-like smile. This isn't my first case involving surveillance. Your brother may think he's clever, but you don't know Nathan, Marilyn interrupted, her designer outfit failing to hide the strain of the past week. He doesn't make moves unless he's certain of the outcome. McKinney leaned forward, his expensive suit creaking. Then we change the game. Attack his reputation, his credibility. The controlling husband, obsessed with surveillance, fabricating evidence out of paranoia. The hospital board, Howard's eyes lit up. I've built relationships there for years. Nathan's always been the outsider, focused on his surgeries. Perfect. McKinney began typing on his laptop. I'll draft a statement suggesting psychological evaluation. Question his fitness to practice. Marilyn's laugh held a bitter edge. Nathan, unfit? He's performed more successful surgeries than any other doctor in the state. Success can feed obsession, McKinney countered. Howard, set up a board meeting. Make it seem like you're concerned about your brother's mental state. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following day. Howard stood before the gathered members, his performance carefully calibrated to project worried sincerity. Nathan's always been obsessed with control, Howard told the assembled board members, his voice carrying just the right note of reluctant concern. These accusations, they're fabrications born from his inability to handle Marilyn's independence. Dr. Wade Rhodes, the board chairman who'd been quietly supporting Howard's administrative decisions for years, nodded sympathetically. These are serious concerns, Howard. Perhaps a mandatory leave of absence. The boardroom door opened. Nathan walked in, Clay Maloney's imposing figure following with a laptop. Perfect timing. Nathan's voice cut through the murmurs. I was hoping to discuss some financial irregularities myself. Howard's face paled. This is a closed meeting. About my mental health? Nathan smiled, the expression reminiscent of a surgeon before making the first incision. Interesting timing, considering what Clay found in the hospital's auxiliary accounts. Clay connected the laptop to the presentation screen. Numbers began scrolling, followed by recordings. Howard's voice filled the room, discussing fund transfers with Wade Rhodes. Just move it through the equipment budget, Howard was saying. Nathan's too busy in surgery to notice. Rhodes' face turned ashen as his own voice appeared. The board audit won't catch it if we… I think, Nathan said into the silence that followed, we should discuss a different kind of leave of absence. The next few weeks unfolded like a carefully orchestrated surgery. Each revelation was timed for maximum impact, each piece of evidence deployed with precision. During a particularly tense deposition, Spencer sat across from Nathan, his expensive shirt wrinkled from hours of questioning. You don't understand, Dad, Spencer pleaded, his facade of defiance cracking. Mom and Uncle Howard said you'd destroy everyone if you ever found out. They said you were dangerous. Nathan studied the young man he'd raised, seeing now the subtle resemblances to Howard that he'd overlooked for years. No, son, they were the dangerous ones, and you chose their side. They needed help hiding the transfers, Spencer continued, his voice small. Just small things at first, when I was 15. Running errands, delivering documents. Fraud doesn't start with large crimes, Nathan replied, his tone clinical. It starts with small betrayals, justified by convenient lies. The legal proceedings revealed layers of deception that even Nathan hadn't anticipated. Marilyn had been systematically draining accounts since Spencer's 10th birthday. Howard had used his position as hospital administrator to cover financial irregularities that went beyond their affair. The evidence mounted, each revelation more damning than the last. During a settlement negotiation, Marilyn's mask of sophistication finally cracked. You're enjoying this, she spat across the conference table. Destroying everything we built. Everything you stole, Nathan corrected calmly. There's a difference. We had a life before you became obsessed with your career, she countered. Howard was there when you were playing hero in the operating room. Playing hero? Nathan's laugh held no humor. While I was saving lives, you were stealing from those same patients. The foundation funds, Marilyn. Did you think I wouldn't find those transfers? Howard slammed his hand on the table. You self-righteous bastard. You think you're better than everyone else, up in your surgical tower. Better? No. Nathan sliding a document across the table. Just more thorough. This is a complete audit of the hospital's charitable foundation. The board received a copy this morning. Howard's face went from red to white as he scanned the pages. You can't. The medical board received it too, Nathan continued. They're particularly interested in the cancer research funds. Tell me, Howard, how many trials were delayed because you diverted their funding? The investigation moved quickly after that. Howard's medical license was suspended pending a full review. Marilyn's carefully cultivated social circle evaporated as evidence of her manipulations became public. Spencer, his college fund frozen due to evidence of his involvement in the financial fraud, watched his carefully planned future crumble. Nathan's divorce proceedings moved with the same precision he brought to his surgeries. Each attempt by Marilyn to claim assets was met with documented evidence of her deception. Howard's efforts to maintain his position at the hospital collapsed under the weight of forensic accounting. You could show some mercy, Howard attempted during their final confrontation at the hospital. We're still brothers. Nathan's voice could have frosted glass. You betrayed my trust, stole from my patients, and corrupted my son. Biology doesn't excuse that. The patients were never at risk, Howard protested weakly. The funds were always. 6 months, Nathan cut him off. 6 months of delayed cancer trials because you diverted their funding. How many lives were affected by those delays, Howard? The hospital board's decision was unanimous. Howard's termination was followed by a referral to the state medical board for ethics violations. His career in hospital administration was effectively over. Marilyn's attempts to salvage her reputation fared no better. Her friends, many of them hospital board members' wives, turned their backs as evidence emerged of her systematic manipulation. I hear she tried to join the country club committee, Nathan overheard one nurse telling another. They wouldn't even take her application. After what she did to those charity funds, the second nurse replied. She's lucky she's not in jail. The final blow came when Nathan's lawyers revealed the extent of Spencer's involvement. The trust fund transfers, the falsified volunteer hours, The years of small betrayals that had grown into significant fraud. He was just a kid when they started grooming him, Clay observed during one of their strategy sessions. Old enough to know right from wrong, Nathan replied, reviewing another set of documents. Old enough to make choices. Within months, the war Nathan had prepared for was effectively over. Howard's medical license suspension was heading toward permanent revocation. Marilyn's divorce settlement left her with only what she'd brought into the marriage, which proved to be far less than she'd claimed. As Nathan sat in his office, reviewing the final settlement documents, he reflected on the precision with which everything had unfolded. Like a complex surgery, each step had been planned, each potential complication anticipated. His phone buzzed, a message from Clay about Howard's latest desperate attempt to salvage his career. Trying to claim rights to your research patents, the message read. Should I release the evidence about his attempted data theft? Nathan smiled, thinking of the backup files he'd maintained for years, documenting every suspicious access to his research databases. Release everything, he typed back. It's time to close this procedure. The sun was setting over the city as Nathan signed the final divorce decree. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, he could appreciate the completeness of the operation he'd just concluded. Some cancers required aggressive treatment, and he'd just excised one from his life with surgical precision. 3 years passed like well-planned surgical procedures, precise, methodical, and with predictable outcomes. Nathan Clark stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse overlooking the city, watching the sunset paint the skyline in shades of amber. His reflection showed a man who had emerged stronger from betrayal, his steel-gray hair now a distinguished silver at the temples, his posture that of someone who commanded respect rather than demanded it. The notification sound from his laptop drew his attention back to his desk, where the quarterly reports from his private practice showed numbers that would make any hospital administrator envious. Not that Howard would know. Nathan's former brother now worked at a small-town clinic in Nebraska, his medical career a shadow of its former glory. Dr. Clark? His assistant's voice came through the intercom. Dr. Hannah Reynolds is here for your 6 p.m. meeting. Nathan smiled, a genuine expression that had become more frequent in recent months. Send her in, Sarah. Hannah entered with the confident stride of someone who spent their days making split-second decisions in the trauma unit. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, her scrubs replaced by casual business attire that spoke of a woman who understood both operating rooms and boardrooms. Quarterly numbers look good, she noted, glancing at his screen, though I'm more interested in dinner. I've got an hour before I'm back on call. Their relationship had developed naturally over the past year, built on shared understanding of dedication and integrity. Hannah had been chief of trauma surgery when the truth about Howard's mismanagement of hospital funds came to light. Italian? Nathan suggested, reaching for his jacket. There's a new place downtown that... His phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender's name made him pause. Spencer Clark. I need to see you. It's important. Hannah read the message over his shoulder, her expression concerned. Are you going to respond? Yes, Nathan replied, his voice neutral. This was inevitable. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Nathan sat behind his desk, watching Spencer approach through the office windows. His once son looked older than his 21 years, the expensive clothes replaced by worn jeans and a shabby jacket. I need help with college tuition, Spencer began without preamble, dropping into the chair across from Nathan. Mom and Howard can't. Before you continue, Nathan interrupted. Opening his desk drawer to remove 2 sealed envelopes. Read these. Spencer's hands trembled slightly as he opened the first envelope. The DNA test results were clear, clinical in their devastation. The second envelope contained transcripts, years of recorded conversations between Spencer, Howard, and Marilyn, plotting their deceptions. Howard is your biological father, Nathan said quietly, watching the color drain from Spencer's face. Has been since before you were born. That's why you had to choose sides. You were always on his side. Dad. Spencer's face crumpled, the arrogance of graduation day long gone. I'm not your dad. I never was. That was your first betrayal, letting me believe I was. I didn't know until... Until when? Nathan's voice remained steady. When did you start helping them hide evidence? 15, wasn't it? Old enough to know right from wrong. Spencer slumped in his chair. Mom said you'd help with tuition. Said you wouldn't want your reputation damaged by having your son drop out of college. My reputation? Nathan's laugh held no warmth. My reputation is built on integrity, Spencer. Something you, Howard, and Marilyn never understood. Howard lost everything, Spencer protested. The clinic barely pays enough for them to survive. Mom had to sell her jewelry just. Actions have consequences. Nathan cut him off. Your mother's social circle evaporated because she stole from their charity foundations. Howard's medical license was suspended because he diverted cancer research funds. Your college fund was frozen because you helped them hide the evidence. These aren't tragedies, Spencer. They're justice. So that's it? You're just going to let your Spencer caught himself? Let me drop out of college? Nathan reached for another folder. These are the names of every cancer patient whose treatment was delayed because Howard diverted research funds. Read them. Understand what your real father did to people who trusted him with their lives. Spencer's hands shook as he scanned the list. I didn't know. You knew enough, Nathan replied. Now you know more. Consider it your final lesson from me. As Spencer left the office, Nathan felt no remorse. His phone buzzed with a message from Hannah about dinner plans. On his desk, a photo of his new charitable foundation's first scholarship recipients, all children of cancer patients, reminded him that family wasn't always about blood. That evening, over dinner at their favorite restaurant, Hannah watched him with understanding eyes. Spencer came by the trauma unit today, she said. Asked if I could talk to you about reconsidering. And I told him that integrity isn't negotiable. Hannah's smile was fierce. He didn't like that answer. Nathan nodded, appreciating once again how well she understood him. Their relationship had grown from mutual respect into something deeper, built on shared values rather than decades of lies. The next morning brought news that Howard and Marilyn had made one final attempt to claim part of Nathan's new medical patents. The attempt failed spectacularly when Nathan's lawyers revealed evidence of Howard's previous attempts to steal research data. They never learn, Clay Maloney commented, dropping the legal documents on Nathan's desk. Still trying to take what isn't theirs. Old habits, Nathan replied, signing the final restraining order that would prevent any future contact. How's the foundation doing? First round of scholarships went out last week. The board's impressed with how you've turned Howard's fraud into something positive. Nathan looked out over the city he now called home. The view from his office reminded him of how far he'd come from that afternoon by the pool, watching his world unravel. He'd lost a family built on lies but gained something more valuable, the truth about loyalty and the strength to stand alone rather than compromise his principles. Later that evening, dining with Hannah at his penthouse, Nathan realized something profound. She was discussing a complicated trauma case, her passion for saving lives matching his own dedication to his patients. Here was someone who understood that sometimes the best revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about rebuilding something stronger from the ashes of betrayal. You're quiet tonight, Hannah observed, pouring another glass of wine. Just thinking about choices, Nathan replied. And consequences. Regrets? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. No, Nathan said firmly. Just appreciation for truth. It's cleaner than comfortable lies. His phone buzzed one final time. A notification that Howard's attempt to appeal his license suspension had been denied. Nathan silenced the phone without reading the full message. Some chapters needed to stay closed. The city lights sparkled below, a testament to life moving forward. Nathan had rebuilt his world with the same precision he brought to his surgeries, cutting out the cancer of betrayal and ensuring it could never grow back. The emptiness of loss had been filled with something better. Integrity, purpose, and the knowledge that sometimes the strongest families were the ones you chose, not the ones you were born into. As Hannah discussed plans for expanding the Foundation's scholarship program, Nathan felt the last pieces of his old life fade into irrelevance. He had excised the cancer of betrayal from his life with surgical precision, and in its place, he had built something far more valuable, a life founded on truth, supported by integrity, and enriched by genuine connections. The price of betrayal had been high, but the rewards of honesty were proving to be worth every painful incision along the way. Epilogue: 5 years after the reckoning. The small-town clinic in Nebraska where Howard now worked barely resembled the prestigious hospital he once administered. The peeling paint and outdated equipment served as daily reminders of his fall from grace. At 58, his once commanding presence had deteriorated into that of a bitter man who treated routine cases of flu and minor injuries. "Dr. Andrews, your next patient is waiting," the receptionist called out, deliberately using Howard's mother's maiden name. After the scandal, he'd been forced to change it. The Clark name carried too much weight in medical circles, all of it negative. His office, a cramped room with fluorescent lighting, contained newspaper clippings he obsessively collected about Nathan's continued success. The most recent showed Nathan receiving a humanitarian award for his charitable foundation's work in providing medical care to underprivileged children. Marilyn, now showing every day of her 55 years, worked as a receptionist at a local dentist's office. Her designer clothes had been replaced by discount store finds, her once perfect manicures now chipped and self-maintained. The other wives in town whispered about her past, the story of her betrayal having followed them even to this remote corner of Nebraska. "Did you see the society pages?" Marilyn asked Howard that evening in their rented 2-bedroom apartment. "Nathan and Hannah's foundation just opened another free clinic. They're expecting their first child." Howard's hand trembled as he poured himself another drink. "Leave it alone, Marilyn." But she couldn't. The laptop screen showed photos from a recent charity gala. Nathan distinguished in a tuxedo, Hannah elegantly showing her pregnancy. The article detailed their work: 3 free clinics, a scholarship program for medical students from underprivileged backgrounds, and a research foundation focusing on pediatric cancer, funded partially by the settlement money from Howard's fraud case. Their own son, Spencer, had eventually completed his community college degree through night classes while working as a pharmacy technician. He tried reaching out to Nathan once more 2 years ago, sending a congratulatory email when Nathan and Hannah's wedding was announced. The email bounced back. Nathan's lawyers maintained a strict no-contact policy. Clay Maloney, whose security firm now handled all of Nathan's charitable organizations, had established a comprehensive monitoring system. Any attempts by Howard, Marilyn, or Spencer to approach Nathan or his new family resulted in immediate legal consequences. "Remember Sandra's wedding invitation?" Marilyn muttered, referring to her former best friend. The invitation had been returned unopened. Her once vast social circle had contracted to a few other disgraced individuals they'd met in Nebraska. Howard's ex-wife Linda had thrived after their divorce. She'd used her settlement to open a successful wellness center, her social media showing frequent trips to Europe and a new husband who looked at her with genuine devotion. She'd even been invited to Nathan and Hannah's wedding. The hospital board chairman, Wade Rhodes, had resigned in disgrace after Nathan's evidence exposed the full extent of the financial fraud. He occasionally saw Howard at medical conferences for small regional clinics, both men avoiding eye contact, their name tags displaying different surnames than the ones they'd worn in their prime. Sarachin, the nurse who'd worked with Nathan for years, had been promoted to chief nursing officer at his private practice. She took particular satisfaction in returning any messages from Howard or Marilyn with a form letter citing the no-contact policy. "We should never have tried to claim those patents," Marilyn said, closing the laptop. Their last attempt to grab at Nathan's success had resulted in their lawyer dropping them as clients and another hefty fine they were still paying off. Howard's medical license remained restricted, requiring annual reviews and limiting the procedures he could perform. The small-town clinic tolerated him because they were desperately understaffed, but his colleagues maintained a professional distance, the whispers about his past following him through the corridors. Meanwhile, Nathan and Hannah's life exemplified everything Howard and Marilyn had lost. Their private practice had expanded to 3 locations, each specializing in different aspects of surgery and trauma care. The charitable foundation, named after one of the cancer patients whose treatment had been delayed by Howard's fraud, provided hope to families facing medical crises. Clay's security reports, which he still maintained out of professional thoroughness, painted a pathetic picture of the conspirators' lives. Spencer worked double shifts to afford a small apartment, his dreams of medical school permanently shattered. He'd tried dating, but background checks by potential in-laws inevitably uncovered his past, ending relationships before they could develop. Marilyn's attempts to maintain appearances grew more desperate each year. Her hair dye couldn't quite cover the gray. Her makeup couldn't hide the bitter lines around her mouth. The local society wives excluded her from their events, her past making her a liability to their reputations. The final insult had come when Howard's mother changed her will before passing away, leaving her estate to a medical scholarship fund administered by Nathan's foundation. She'd included a letter, made public as part of the bequest, expressing her shame at Howard's actions and her hope that Nathan's work would help repair some of the damage her son had caused. Nathan and Hannah welcomed their daughter, Grace Integrity Clark, in the spring. The birth announcement in the medical journal included a note about a new pediatric wing being opened in her honor. Howard saw the announcement during his lunch break, his hands shaking so badly he spilled coffee on his worn dress shirt. The contrast between the lives they'd chosen could not have been starker. Nathan had built his success on integrity and dedication, while Howard and Marilyn's betrayal had earned them a harvest of consequences they couldn't escape. Every day brought fresh reminders of their fall. Rejected credit cards, unanswered social invitations, professional doors firmly closed. Clay's latest security report sat on Nathan's desk, untouched. He no longer needed to read about their struggles. His focus remained on the future, the expanding medical practice, the growing foundation, his new family built on trust rather than lies. The price of betrayal had been high, but only for those who had chosen to betray. Nathan's new life stood as testament to the power of integrity, while Howard and Marilyn's served as a cautionary tale whispered in hospital corridors and country club lounges. Some choices carry consequences that last a lifetime. In the end, their greatest punishment wasn't the loss of money or status. It was having to watch from a distance as Nathan built something far greater than what they had tried to steal, knowing they had no one to blame but themselves.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Title: At a charity event hosted by my wife, her lover's wife walked in, wearing my wedding ring. The look on her face told me everything I needed to know. David Miller had always thought of his marriage as the epitome of perfection. Married to Emma, a stunning and charismatic philanthropist, their life in the bustling city of New York seemed picture-perfect from the outside. Emma was a woman who could light up any room, especially at high-profile charity events like the one they were hosting tonight at the Plaza Hotel. The event was a grand affair, with glittering chandeliers, elegantly dressed guests, and the hum of refined conversations filling the air. As David stood by the bar, sipping his bourbon, he couldn't help but admire his wife's poise and charm as she moved through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging smiles with New York's elite. Yet, amidst all the glamour, something felt off. Emma's usual warmth toward him seemed replaced by a strange aloofness, and David noticed her eyes darting nervously across the room, as if searching for someone. A pang of unease settled in his chest, but he brushed it off, telling himself that she was merely overwhelmed by the scale of the event. Little did he know, the perfect facade of his marriage was about to crack wide open in a way he could have never anticipated. As David lingered near the bar, his unease grew sharper, like a faint but persistent itch he couldn't ignore. The glittering charity event continued in full swing, with guests clinking champagne glasses and the soft hum of a live jazz band filling the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. Suddenly the crowd seemed to part, and a woman entered the room with an air of quiet confidence that turned heads. Dressed in an understated yet elegant black gown, Clara Anderson walked in, her every step commanding attention. David's eyes were drawn to her almost magnetically, but what truly froze him in place was the familiar sparkle of a diamond ring on her left hand. His wedding ring. His heart skipped a beat, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the impossible. Clara's eyes met his, and for a moment, the room seemed to shrink to just the two of them. Her gaze was calm yet piercing, a mix of pity and defiance that sent a chill down his spine. Summoning courage, Clara approached him, her voice low but deliberate. "We need to talk," she said, her words carrying a weight that made David's pulse quicken. She didn't need to say much. Her presence and the ring on her finger were clues enough that she held answers to questions he hadn't yet dared to ask. Her cryptic remarks about Emma and the ring only deepened his suspicions, pulling him into a web of betrayal he hadn't seen coming. In that moment, amidst the grandeur of the charity gala, David's world began to unravel, one veiled hint at a time. David's pulse quickened as Clara's cryptic words echoed in his mind. Determined to uncover the truth, he followed her through the lavish halls of the Plaza Hotel, leaving behind the bustling charity gala. They found a quiet corner in a side lounge, the muted light casting long shadows on the room's ornate decor. Clara's poised exterior began to crack as she sat down, her fingers nervously tracing the outline of his wedding ring. "Your wife and my husband," she began, her voice trembling with anger and pain. She explained how her husband, a successful real estate mogul named Richard Anderson, had given her the ring, a twisted trophy of his affair with Emma. "He said it was a souvenir," Clara spat bitterly, the words dripping with betrayal. As Clara's revelations unraveled, David felt his mind spiral. Fragmented memories began to surface. Emma's late-night phone calls she dismissed as work emergencies, the sudden weekends away for conferences, and the subtle but growing emotional distance between them. Each recollection now carried the weight of evidence, painting a picture he had been too blind or too trusting to see. Clara's story mirrored his own heartbreak. She spoke of her husband's lies, his frequent business trips, and the growing suspicion she had ignored until finding the damning proof: the ring. In their shared pain, David and Clara began piecing together the timeline of the affair. The gala, it seemed, was the nexus of their spouse's betrayal, a playground for their infidelity hidden in plain sight. Clara's heartbreak mirrored his own, and together they formed an unlikely alliance, determined to confront the truth head-on. In that quiet room, surrounded by the echoes of betrayal, David realized the perfection of his marriage had always been a facade, and the reality was far darker than he had imagined. The weight of Clara's revelations burned like fire in David's chest as they stepped back into the grandeur of the Plaza Hotel's main ballroom. The charity gala was still in full swing, the affluent guests blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Fueled by a mix of anger and heartbreak, David could no longer contain himself. Spotting Emma by the stage, her radiant smile and practiced charm now felt like a cruel mockery of their life together. He strode toward her, his voice cutting through the hum of the crowd as he called her name. Conversations faltered, and all eyes turned to them as David confronted Emma under the spotlight she had so carefully curated. "What's this, Emma?" he demanded, holding up Clara's hand with his wedding ring glinting under the chandelier. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Emma's polished facade faltered. At first, she laughed nervously, attempting to dismiss the accusation as absurd. But the weight of Clara's presence, combined with the undeniable evidence, left her no room to maneuver. As David's voice grew colder, recounting the details of her affair with Richard Anderson, Emma's composure crumbled. Her shoulders sagged, her eyes brimming with tears. Not of remorse, but of being caught. The tension reached its peak when Richard entered the room, drawn by the escalating whispers. His presence acted like gasoline on a fire. Emma instinctively stepped toward him, as if seeking refuge, but the act only deepened David's betrayal. Clara, unable to hold back her own anger, stepped forward to confront her husband. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice trembling with fury as she detailed the lies, the deceit, and the ring that had shattered both their lives. Richard tried to defuse the situation, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, But the mounting evidence left no room for doubt. The room grew heavy with an uncomfortable silence as the public confrontation reached its breaking point. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, whispers of scandal spreading like wildfire through New York's elite circles. Emma and Richard, exposed and humiliated, stood frozen as David and Clara finally walked away from the confrontation, their pain now shared but their dignity intact. It was a moment of raw emotion and irreversible change, the perfect veneer of the gala shattered to reveal the dark truth beneath. As the guests dispersed and the once vibrant ballroom of the Plaza Hotel fell silent, David found himself alone with Emma in one of the hotel's private lounges. The tension in the room was palpable, the air heavy with unspoken words. Emma, her makeup smudged and her earlier confidence reduced to fragility, sat across from him. "David, please," she began, her voice trembling. "I can explain." But her explanation, rooted in loneliness, unmet needs, and misguided choices, felt hollow against the enormity of her betrayal. Each word she uttered seemed to widen the chasm between them. The trust that once bound them now shattered beyond repair. Meanwhile, Clara had already made her decision. She had left the event with her head held high, her resolve unshaken. In the back of a yellow cab navigating Manhattan's glittering streets, she texted Richard a single message: "We're done." Her decision to leave was swift but firm, born out of the clarity that there was no salvaging a relationship built on lies. For David, however, the choice was far murkier. As Emma's pleas turned to tears, he wrestled with conflicting emotions. Should he attempt to rebuild what had been destroyed? Or was this the end of a chapter he had once thought would last forever? His thoughts spiraled as he replayed moments from their marriage, the shared laughter, the quiet nights, the growing silences that he had ignored. Had he been blind to the cracks all along? Or had Emma's betrayal simply exposed the truth? That their marriage had been a facade, a carefully curated image for the world to see. Sitting in the dimly lit lounge, David felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The fallout of the night had left him raw and broken, yet he also felt a strange sense of clarity. Whether he forgave Emma or walked away, one thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. As dawn broke over the Manhattan skyline, David sat alone in his apartment, staring at the wedding ring he had slipped off his finger the night before. The night's events still felt surreal, like a nightmare he couldn't escape. Emma had returned to their shared home after their conversation at the Plaza Hotel, her tear-streaked face a stark contrast to the radiant host she had been just hours before. The silence between them was deafening, yet it spoke volumes. David now stood at a crossroads, faced with the weight of a decision that would define the rest of his life. In one version of this ending, David chooses to separate from Emma, the betrayal too deep to mend. In a symbolic act of closure, he leaves the wedding ring on the kitchen counter before walking out of the apartment, the cool morning air offering a bittersweet sense of freedom. This decision, while painful, becomes a testament to his self-respect and unwillingness to live a life built on broken vows. Alternatively, David might find himself willing to rebuild, though not without conditions. He tells Emma that their marriage can only survive if she seeks therapy and earns back his trust, a journey that will require time, patience, and a genuine commitment from both sides. This decision reflects his capacity for forgiveness, but also his understanding that true reconciliation comes with boundaries and mutual effort. In a third possibility, the story concludes ambiguously. David walks out of the Plaza Hotel into the quiet streets of New York, his mind clouded with unresolved emotions. the readers are left to interpret whether he will choose reconciliation, separation, or something in between, mirroring the complexities of real-life relationships. Meanwhile, Clara finds her own sense of closure. Having confronted her husband and made the decision to leave him, she begins a new chapter of her life with her head held high. Her courage and decisiveness serve as a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil David is still navigating. Whether the story ends in separation, rebuilding, or ambiguity, the underlying theme remains the same. Betrayal may shatter the foundations of trust, but it also forces individuals to confront uncomfortable truths and make choices that shape their future. For David and Clara, the events of the gala mark not just an ending, but also the possibility of new beginnings.
It all started on a calm Saturday morning. I had barely poured myself a cup of coffee when my phone rang. It was my parents, letting me know they wanted to visit on Sunday, just to check in and spend some time with us. Being the straightforward man I am, I immediately agreed and told them it was a great idea. Family is important to me, and I figured a quiet Sunday at home with my parents sounded perfect. After hanging up, I told my wife about it. She didn't seem to mind, simply saying, "Okay, that's fine," and went back to whatever she was doing. For me, it was just another normal start to the weekend. Later that afternoon, something odd happened. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone, when I heard her phone ring. The sound itself wasn't unusual, but her reaction was. She practically jumped out of her chair, as if the call were some emergency. Before I could even ask what was going on, she darted toward the kitchen with her phone in hand. That kind of urgency was enough to catch my attention, so I got up and followed her. When I got closer, I could hear her speaking in a hushed voice. She wasn't just being quiet, she was whispering so softly I could barely make out a word. I leaned on the doorframe and asked, "What's going on?" "Who's calling?" She gave me a quick glance, waved her hand dismissively, and mouthed, "Later." That didn't sit right with me. What could be so secretive that she had to whisper like that? I stood there for a moment, debating whether to press the issue, but decided to let it go. She'd explain herself eventually. Or at least, I hoped she would. For now, I returned to the living room, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something strange was unfolding. The conversation didn't end quickly, either. She stayed on the phone for nearly an hour. An entire hour of whispering. By the time she finally hung up, I was no longer just curious, I was irritated. What the hell was that about? I asked as soon as she reappeared. Who on earth were you talking to for that long, and why were you whispering? She looked at me with that casual, unbothered expression that drives me up the wall sometimes and said, "Oh, that was about tomorrow. We're going to have some guests." That set me off. "What do you mean, guests?" "My parents are coming over tomorrow." "Did you forget about that?" I could feel my temper rising, though I kept my tone steady. Her reply didn't help. "Yeah, I know. But these are secret guests," she said, as if that explained anything. "Secret guests?" I repeated, now genuinely annoyed. "You're kidding, right? Who are these people, and why are they coming here of all places? Did you even think to tell me before agreeing to this?" She sighed, as if I were the one being unreasonable, and said, "They're friends of mine." "Well, sort of. I met this woman online a couple of weeks ago on a forum about hobbies and fun stuff, and we really hit it off. She and her husband are coming to visit. They're unique. And they've got something big they want to share. Oh, and they're bringing us a special gift." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "So let me get this straight. Two complete strangers you met on the internet are coming to our house to sit with my parents, and you think this is a good idea?" My voice was calm, but the anger was bubbling beneath the surface. She nodded, unflinching. "It's not that big of a deal. I've already invited them, so it's happening. You'll see, it'll be fine." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had already made the decision without consulting me, and now I was supposed to just go along with it? My jaw tightened as I fixed her with a hard stare. I didn't say another word. Instead, I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there. In my head, all I could think was, who the hell are these people, and how is this supposed to work? I had a sinking feeling this wasn't going to end well. Sunday arrived, and with it came my parents. As expected, they were punctual, dressed in their usual conservative attire, bringing along a homemade pie and their usual warm but formal demeanor. My parents are the kind of people who value tradition and propriety above all else, and I've always respected that about them. As they settled into our living room, I could tell they were glad to be here, and I hoped it would be a peaceful afternoon. I kept glancing at my wife, silently praying that her secret guests would find some reason not to show up. Maybe they'd forget, or maybe the universe would intervene in some miraculous way to spare me the headache. The first hour passed smoothly enough. My mom complimented the curtains, my dad asked me about work, and my wife seemed content, even cheerful. It was a rare moment of calm. But, as if the universe had heard my earlier thoughts and decided to spite me, the doorbell rang. The sound shattered the peace like a rock through a window. My father glanced at me and asked, "Are you expecting someone else?" Before I could respond, my wife was already halfway to the door. "Oh, I forgot to mention," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral, "you're not the only guests we'll have today." My father raised an eyebrow, the lines on his forehead deepening. He's a man of few words, but that look spoke volumes. My mother, ever the picture of composure, sat up straighter, clearly intrigued, but not yet alarmed. Meanwhile, I could feel a knot forming in my stomach. When I turned to see who was at the door, I nearly lost my composure. There they were, the secret guests my wife had been so eager to host. The woman wore pink tights, a miniskirt that looked like it belonged in a high school wardrobe, and a crop top that barely covered anything. Her husband wasn't much better, with his long hair, ripped jeans, and a t-shirt featuring some obscure rock band. They looked completely out of place, like characters from a bad sitcom. My wife greeted them with a sparkle in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. She looked thrilled, as if royalty had just arrived. Meanwhile, I turned to my mom and saw her pale visibly. My dad's expression shifted from curiosity to something closer to disbelief. Before I could even react, the guest stepped inside, carrying a large, brightly wrapped gift. They introduced themselves cheerfully, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. My wife ushered them into the living room, where they placed the gift on the coffee table and announced, "We brought something special for you all." The moment my wife began unwrapping the gift, I knew it was a mistake. Inside was a collection of items that I won't describe in detail, but let's just say they were anything but appropriate for a family gathering. My father's jaw tightened, and my mother looked like she might faint. I grabbed the box, muttered a terse thanks, and carried it out of the room before the situation could get any worse. I placed it in the hallway, far from everyone's view, and returned to find an awkward silence hanging in the air. We all sat down, and my father, ever the disciplinarian, tried to make polite conversation. But it was clear that things were already spiraling. The guests, oblivious to the tension, smiled and whispered to each other, completely at ease. Then came the moment that sealed the disaster. The man from the couple leaned forward and said, "Remember how we talked about making a big announcement?" My wife nodded eagerly. "Well," the man continued, "we've decided to open up our marriage, and we thought this would be the perfect time to share that with everyone." The room erupted. My father, who'd been holding his tongue all evening, could no longer contain himself. "That's not openness," he said sharply. "That's adultery. Plain and simple." The debate quickly escalated into a full-blown argument, with voices rising and tempers flaring. My mother, who hates confrontation, sat frozen, clutching the armrest like a lifeline. The guests tried to defend their lifestyle, but my father wasn't having any of it. At one point, he stood up and said, "If I were your age, I'd have knocked some sense into you by now. But I'm smarter than that, so we're leaving." I escorted my parents to the door, apologizing profusely as my father gave me a look I'll never forget. It was the kind of look that says, "You've really screwed up this time." No words were necessary. The shame hit me like a ton of bricks. After they left, I stood at the door for a moment, staring out into the night, wondering how this day had gone so disastrously wrong. Then, with a heavy sigh, I turned and walked back inside, bracing myself for whatever was to come next. My wife had brought the box back into the living room, and I couldn't believe my eyes as she started pulling out its contents and lining them up on the coffee table. It was bad enough that my parents had witnessed this circus the day before, but now she was treating it like a display at a trade show. I stood there for a moment, watching in disbelief, before turning to the couple who had just finished making themselves comfortable on our couch. "You couldn't have waited until another time, maybe told us privately. This whole thing was poorly timed as it is, and you've managed to make it worse by showing up on the same day as my parents." My tone was firm, leaving no room for ambiguity. Instead of taking the hint, my wife shot me a glare. "Stop ruining what's already ruined," she snapped. "You're not making things any better by harping on it." Her defiance was startling. Before I could respond, she grabbed my arm and dragged me into the kitchen. "We need to talk," I said through clenched teeth. She folded her arms and waited. "This can't go on. You've invited people into our home without consulting me, they caused a massive fight with my parents, and now you're defending them like this is all normal. This needs to stop." She rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed. "You're overreacting. Things will settle down. Let's just get through the evening." I could feel my patience wearing thin, but I decided not to escalate things further. For the rest of the evening, I kept my distance, though my thoughts raced non-stop. What kind of mess had she dragged us into? I couldn't understand how she was so comfortable with everything that had happened. Later, as we sat in strained silence, I decided to address the practical matter of their stay. "When are you planning to leave?" I asked the couple directly. For once, they seemed caught off guard. The husband exchanged a look with his wife before responding, "Well, we were actually hoping to stay here for a while. You know, just until we get back on our feet." His casual tone made it sound as if this was a perfectly reasonable request. I stared at them, then at my wife, waiting for her to shut this idea down. To my shock, she said, "Of course you can stay. We have plenty of room." My stomach dropped. Was she serious? I managed to keep my composure but couldn't stop myself from thinking, this is unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. The couple wasted no time making themselves at home. They went to take a shower, together, of course, and I turned to my wife, finally letting my frustration show. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I asked, my voice low but intense. First, they completely disrupted things with my parents. Then, they decided they'd just stay here without even asking properly. And now you're letting them walk all over us. I have work tomorrow, and you'll be the one dealing with them. She shrugged dismissively. Your parents are too sensitive. It's not my fault they overreacted. And what's wrong with being hospitable? They needed a place to stay, and we have space. Her nonchalance was infuriating, but before I could argue further, she added, besides, tomorrow is going to be great. When you get home, you'll see. You'll love it. That night, we went to bed, leaving the couple to sleep on the couch in the living room. Also, I thought. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by noises coming from the other side of the house. At first, I tried to ignore it, hoping they'd quiet down. But it only got louder. I couldn't believe it when I realized what they were doing. Right there, in our living room. I lay there, fuming, unable to sleep, and knowing full well that tomorrow was going to be an even bigger disaster. In the morning, as I got ready for work, I turned to my wife and said, if this kind of thing happens again, I'm throwing them out. I don't care how it looks or what they say. They're out. She waved me off like it was nothing. Oh, stop being so dramatic. By tonight, you'll feel differently. Just wait and see. You'll come around. Her confidence only made me more uneasy, but I didn't have the energy to argue. Instead, I left for work, already dreading what I'd come home to. Leaving for work that morning, I tried to push the tension from the previous night out of my mind. I focused on the tasks ahead, hoping the day would provide some relief from the chaos at home. By the time I returned that evening, I was mentally exhausted and eager for a quiet dinner. But as I approached the house, the thumping bass of loud music greeted me before I even reached the door. My heart sank. This couldn't be real. Surely, I thought, I'd walked into someone else's nightmare. But no, it was my house. My sanctuary. And it was hosting a party I hadn't approved. Opening the door, I was met with a scene that could only be described as madness. Strangers were everywhere, spilling drinks, laughing loudly, and dancing without a care in the world. Some of my friends were there too, looking out of place and uncomfortable. One of them approached me as soon as I stepped inside. "Hey, man," he said, his voice low. I don't know whose idea this was, but it's not what I expected. There's some guy walking around pitching open marriage to people. It's weird. My blood boiled. "Where's my wife?" I asked, my voice clipped. He shrugged. "Haven't seen her in a while. Honestly, we were about to leave. This whole thing feels off." That was all I needed to hear. I pushed through the crowd, scanning faces and dodging spilled drinks, trying to find her. Strangers stared at me, but I ignored them, focused on my mission. After searching the downstairs rooms and finding no sign of her, I headed upstairs, dreading what I might find. My heart pounded as I checked each room. Finally, in the bedroom, I found her. She was sprawled across the bed, deeply asleep and clearly drunk. The sight made my stomach churn. This was my wife, the woman I'd vowed to build a life with, and here she was, passed out in the middle of a disaster she had likely facilitated. I stormed back downstairs and called for everyone's attention. "Party's over," I announced. "Get out. Now." Some people laughed, thinking I was joking, but I wasn't in the mood to argue. I said, "Get out." I bellowed. My friends backed me up, helping to usher the guests out the door. Bottles clinked as they were knocked over, and chairs scraped against the floor as people scrambled to leave. Within minutes, the house was empty, except for the couple who had started all of this. The husband of the pair had the audacity to approach me. "Look," he began, "we didn't mean for things to get out of hand. We're really sorry, but we've got nowhere else to go. Our landlord kicked us out, and we thought we could stay here for a bit while we figure things out." I stared at him, barely containing my anger. "That's not my problem. You've overstayed your welcome, and you've crossed every possible line. Get out. Now." They tried to argue, but I wasn't listening. My patience had run out. I said, "Out." Defeated, they finally gathered their things and left, muttering apologies that meant nothing to me. Once the door closed behind them, I let out a long breath and looked around at the wreckage. The house was a mess, empty bottles and food wrappers everywhere, sticky floors, and a couch that smelled like spilled beer. I grabbed a trash bag and started cleaning up, too wound up to sit still. As I worked, my mind raced. How had it come to this? How had my home, my life, been turned upside down in such a short amount of time? I couldn't avoid the inevitable confrontation with my wife. She would have to answer for this, for the chaos, for the strangers, for the couple who had so shamelessly imposed on us. And most of all, for keeping me in the dark about everything. Who were these people? What was their story? And why had she let them into our lives without telling me the truth? As I tossed another broken bottle into the trash bag, I knew one thing for certain: we were going to have a serious conversation, and it wouldn't be a pleasant one. I woke up feeling worse than I had the night before. The stress, the lack of sleep, and the disaster of the past few days had finally caught up to me. My head throbbed, and my body felt like it had been put through a meat grinder. I called in sick and decided to take the day to regroup. As I shuffled out of bed, I realized the house was eerily quiet. My wife was nowhere to be found. Her side of the bed was cold, and there was no sign of her in the kitchen or living room. Immediately, suspicion flared. It didn't take much to guess where she might be. I grabbed my phone and called her. It rang a few times before she answered, her voice annoyingly casual. "Hey, I'm at my friend's place. Don't worry, everything's fine. I'll be back soon." Her tone, light and dismissive, only fueled my irritation. "What do you mean, you're at a friend's?" I snapped. "Where exactly have you been all morning? Why didn't you tell me?" She sighed, as if I were the unreasonable one. "Calm down. I'll explain when I get home." And with that, she hung up. My fists clenched around the phone. The audacity of her nonchalance made my blood boil. When she finally arrived, I was ready. I'd spent the morning cleaning up the aftermath of the previous night's disaster, taking photos of the wreckage as proof of how far things had spiraled out of control. I showed her the pictures one by one, laying them out like evidence in a courtroom. "This is what I came home to," I said, my voice ice cold. I expected to find some semblance of normalcy, maybe even a quiet evening. Instead, I walked into chaos. "And where were you?" "Drunk and passed out upstairs. I had to kick out those freeloaders myself." She crossed her arms and frowned. "I noticed. And honestly, that was really mean of you. They needed help, and you threw them out like they were trash. It wasn't fair." Her words struck a nerve. "Not fair?" I repeated, incredulous. "What's not fair is you inviting strangers into our home without my consent. What's not fair is you keeping me in the dark about all of this. And what's definitely not fair is you expecting me to clean up the mess they left behind while you go play savior." She rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed with my argument. "Fine. You want to know where I was? I was helping them find a new place to stay. And, for your information, they're going to live with my friend now. So there. Problem solved." Her smug tone only irritated me further. "Problem solved?" I asked, incredulous. "You just dumped your problem onto someone else. You've essentially handed your friend a ticking time bomb. Do you even know what kind of trouble you've gotten us into?" She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Look, you don't understand. I've been talking to them for weeks. They're good people. They just hit a rough patch. I met them on a forum about personal freedom and success. They're working on this amazing course that's going to help so many people. I took their course, and it changed my perspective on life. They said I was great, and we became friends. But they had some issues with their studio, and they needed somewhere to stay while they worked on a new program. That's all this is." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "So let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You took some online course, befriended the instructors, and decided it was a good idea to let them live with us. Without asking me?" She didn't flinch. "Yes. And honestly, I think you're being dramatic about this whole thing. They even offered us a chance to invest in their next course. The returns could be huge." My patience snapped. "Invest? Absolutely not. We're not giving them a single cent. They've done nothing but disrupt our lives since they got here. And another thing," I said, pointing a finger at her, "you're done talking to them. I don't care what they promised or how much you believe in their bullshit. You're cutting ties with them. End of discussion." She glared at me, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "You can't just tell me who I can and can't talk to," she said, her voice shaking with defiance. "Watch me," I replied, turning my back on her. The rest of the day passed in icy silence, with her sulking in one corner of the house and me cleaning up the remains of yet another disaster. But no matter how quiet the house became, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 3 weeks had gone by since the whirlwind of chaos had seemingly subsided. Life had returned to a semblance of normalcy, and I began to feel like the storm might truly be over. The house was quiet, the nights were undisturbed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could come home and not brace myself for whatever might await me. I found solace in routine, hoping that my wife had finally taken to heart everything we'd argued about. But as they say, peace is often the prelude to a new storm. One evening, I returned home after a long day at work, ready to enjoy a calm evening. As I walked through the door, I could hear my wife talking on the phone. It wasn't unusual, but something about the tone of her voice caught my attention. She sounded animated, excited even. I called out a quick greeting, which she acknowledged distractedly, then made my way to the bathroom to wash up. As I stood there, scrubbing the grime of the day from my hands, I realized she was still on the phone. The conversation was dragging on longer than usual. A nagging thought crept into my mind. Could it be them again? The couple who had wreaked havoc on our lives not so long ago? I shook my head, trying to dismiss the idea. Surely she wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Surely she had learned her lesson. But as the minutes ticked by and the conversation showed no signs of ending, my unease grew. I finished washing up and headed back to the living room, determined to get some answers. Just as I entered the room, she hung up the phone. Her eye sparkled with an intensity one hadn't seen in weeks. Before I could say a word, she turned to me with a wide grin and said, "You won't believe this. I've had so much time to think over the past few weeks, and I've realized something. The reason I've been feeling so stuck lately, like I'm in a rut, is because I haven't been working." I raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this was going. "Of course," I said. "That's what I've been saying. Things would be a lot easier if you had a job. It's good for structure, purpose, and, well, the finances." She nodded eagerly, as if she had come to this revelation all on her own. "Exactly. And guess what? My friend just offered me a job. She's coming over tomorrow to explain everything." This caught me off guard. "A job?" I asked, cautiously optimistic. "What kind of job?" She shrugged, clearly unbothered by the lack of specifics. She didn't go into a lot of detail, but it's remote, and the hours are super flexible. Sometimes I'd have to go to the office, but only to submit reports or meet deadlines. It's perfect, don't you think? I wanted to feel relieved, but the vagueness of it all set off alarm bells in my head. Still, I decided not to jump to conclusions. "I guess that depends on what it actually entails," I said. "When she comes over tomorrow, we'll hear her out and see what she has to say." My wife's enthusiasm didn't waver. "It's going to be great," she insisted. "I'm finally going to have something meaningful to do. And you'll see, this is going to be a game changer for both of us." I gave her a tight-lipped smile, still feeling skeptical but unwilling to burst her bubble just yet. "All right," I said, nodding slowly. "Okay, let's see what your friend has to say tomorrow. Go ahead and invite her over. We'll take it from there." Despite my reservations, I knew there was no point in arguing about something that hadn't even been fully explained yet. For now, I'd play along, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than she was letting on. That day was one of my rare days off, and I decided to make the most of it. My wife and I spent the morning tidying up the house and preparing for her friend's visit. She was clearly excited, going out of her way to make everything perfect. I, on the other hand, approached the situation with cautious optimism. While I was glad she was finally considering work, I couldn't ignore the nagging doubts in the back of my mind. By early afternoon, the house was spotless, the table was set, and we were ready for her friend's arrival. The doorbell rang right on time. I opened the door, and there she was, the same woman who had housed that troublesome couple weeks ago. My stomach tightened instinctively, but I kept my face neutral. She greeted us warmly and stepped inside, looking far more composed than during our last encounter. My wife, practically beaming, ushered her into the living room, and we all sat down to chat. The initial conversation was polite and light, mostly small talk. I waited patiently, eager to get to the real reason for her visit. At one point, I couldn't help but bring up the elephant in the room. "So, about that couple who was staying with you," I began, careful to keep my tone casual. "How's that situation going?" She didn't hesitate. "Oh, I kicked them out weeks ago," she said firmly. "They were not what I expected." Don't worry, they're not my problem anymore. Her answer was straightforward and logical enough to put me at ease. If nothing else, it seemed like she had learned her lesson about letting them overstay their welcome. With that out of the way, she shifted the conversation to the real purpose of her visit, explaining the job she had offered my wife. She laid out the responsibilities in detail, describing how my wife would be working remotely to process applications in their system. Occasionally, she would need to visit the office to submit reports and handle payroll tasks, but most of the work could be done from the comfort of home. The pay structure sounded fair, with a base salary plus a percentage of sales. As far as I could tell, it seemed legitimate. I glanced at my wife, who was hanging on every word. She looked thrilled, and I could see the enthusiasm in her eyes. "That sounds great," I said cautiously. "And everything's above board?" Her friend smiled reassuringly. "Of course. We've been running this for years. It's a great opportunity, and I think she'll be fantastic at it." My wife nodded eagerly, clearly ready to dive in. I decided not to press further. "All right then. Sounds like you've got yourself a deal," I said. From that day forward, my wife's work began. She threw herself into it with surprising enthusiasm, setting up her workspace and diving into the tasks assigned to her. For the first time in a while, she seemed genuinely energized and purposeful. I watched from the sidelines, silently relieved to see her so engaged. The house felt different, too, calmer, more focused. It was a welcome change. About a week into her new job, she approached me with another bit of news. "They're having a little office party next week," she said, her tone light and cheerful. "It's just a small gathering to celebrate some milestones. I'll need to go into the office for it." I nodded, seeing no harm in it. "All right. Sounds reasonable. I might be late getting home that day, though, so don't wait up for me." She smiled, clearly unfazed by my potential absence. "That's fine," she said. "Actually, they're planning something special for me at the party. A little surprise. So don't worry if I'm out late, okay? Everything's going to be great." Her excitement was infectious, but a small part of me couldn't help but wonder what kind of surprise they had in store. Still, I nodded and said, "All right. Have fun, and let me know how it goes." She kissed me on the cheek and walked away, humming to herself, leaving me to hope that this new chapter in her life would finally bring some stability to ours. The day began like any other. I was at work, focused on the usual tasks, when I received a notification on my phone that made my stomach drop. Nearly all the money in my bank account had been withdrawn. I stared at the screen in disbelief, refreshing the app repeatedly in the hope that it was some sort of glitch. But the numbers didn't change. Panic quickly set in. What the hell was going on? I excused myself from a meeting, called my bank, and they confirmed that the transactions had gone through. It wasn't a mistake. I immediately informed my boss that I needed to leave. Fortunately, he's an understanding guy and didn't ask too many questions. I jumped in my car and drove home as fast as I legally could, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it fraud? Had my account been hacked? Or was it something worse? By the time I pulled into the driveway, I was on edge, prepared for the worst but still hoping for some rational explanation. As soon as I opened the door, my worst fears were realized. There, in our bedroom, was my wife. And she wasn't alone. That man from the infamous couple was with her, both of them caught in the act. My world seemed to tilt as rage surged through me. I pulled out my phone and started recording, not trusting myself to speak without evidence of what I was seeing. My wife screamed at me to stop, but I didn't. I needed proof. Proof for what, I didn't yet know, but I knew I needed it. I put the phone down and reached into the drawer of the bedside table, where I kept my firearm for emergencies. The situation was escalating quickly, but my actions felt oddly deliberate, almost automatic. I pointed the gun at the man, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" I demanded. He stammered, his hands up in a show of surrender, while my wife tried to intervene. "Put it down," she begged. "You don't understand." But before anyone could calm the situation, the man made a sudden move toward me. My reflexes took over, and I fired. The bullet hit him in the stomach, and he collapsed onto the floor, groaning in pain. The sound of the shot rang through the house, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. My wife screamed, her hands covering her mouth, as I reached for my phone to call the police. Within minutes, officers and paramedics arrived, and the man was rushed to the hospital under police supervision. They took my statement, confiscated my firearm, and assured me the situation would be thoroughly investigated. When the chaos settled and we were alone, I turned to my wife, my anger boiling over. "What the hell were you thinking?" I shouted. She tried to compose herself, but her voice trembled as she spoke. "Before you judge me, just listen," she said. "I want to be honest with you. I've been unfaithful. Not just with him, but with others. 6 others, to be exact. And I realize that I can't stop. It's something I enjoy, something I need. That's why I'm proposing we open our marriage." I stared at her, stunned. My mind couldn't process the words coming out of her mouth. Open our marriage? After everything she had done? "Get out," I said coldly. She blinked, clearly surprised by my lack of reaction. "Take your things and get out of my house. Now." To my shock, she didn't argue. She calmly packed a bag, walked out the door, and left without so much as a backward glance. Once she was gone, I locked every door and window in the house, ensuring no one could disturb the fragile solitude I had reclaimed. My thoughts were a chaotic mess, but I knew one thing: I needed a break from all of this. I called my boss and explained the situation, requesting some time off. He agreed without hesitation, offering his support and understanding. Next, I called the bank to block my account and prevent any further unauthorized transactions. The representative assured me they'd investigate the withdrawals, but it would take time. As I hung up the phone, the weight of the day finally crashed down on me. Exhausted and emotionally drained, I fell onto the couch and closed my eyes. For now, there was nothing more I could do. Tomorrow, I would pick up the pieces and figure out how to move forward. But tonight, all I could do was try to get some rest. The next morning, I woke up feeling slightly more composed, though the events of the previous day still weighed heavily on me. My house was quiet, eerily so, but for once, I welcomed the silence. As I moved around, trying to put my thoughts in order, my eyes landed on her laptop. She had left it on the dining table, a glaring reminder of her presence despite her absence. Curiosity, or perhaps desperation, got the better of me. I sat down, opened the lid, and watched the screen come to life. I had no idea what I was about to uncover. The desktop was cluttered with folders and icons, but one stood out immediately: the program she had been using for her so-called job. I clicked on it, and within seconds, the truth began to unravel. It was the course she had mentioned, the one created by that insufferable couple. The realization hit me like a freight train. My hands shook as I navigated through the files, each click revealing more evidence of deceit. This wasn't just a harmless job, it was a well-organized scam, and my wife had been deeply involved. As I delved deeper, I found a folder filled with chat logs and emails. Reading through them, I pieced together the full extent of the betrayal. The couple hadn't been kicked out by her friend as I had been led to believe. On the contrary, her friend had been a willing participant in their schemes. Together, they had formed a group to orchestrate this scam, recruiting others and building a network of deception. My wife's role? Processing applications and, worse, accessing people's financial information. The very thought made my stomach churn. One email thread caught my attention. It was a conversation between my wife, the couple, and her friend. They discussed their plans openly, even brazenly. The tone was celebratory, as if they were proud of their deceit. They joked about how easily people fell for their pitches and how lucrative the operation had become. And then I saw it, a message about me. They had planned for her to leave me eventually, but not before she drained as much money as she could from me. My jaw tightened as I read their cold, calculated words. The audacity was staggering. The pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. The unexplained withdrawals from my account, the secrecy, and her sudden interest in this so-called job, it all made sense now. Further digging revealed client information, including bank details that had been used for fraudulent charges. My wife had memorized my account details, using our trusted devices to authorize transactions without raising suspicion. It was a scheme so audacious that I almost couldn't believe it was real. What angered me most was the sheer arrogance of it all. They had left a digital trail, as if they were untouchable. Chat logs, spreadsheets, even screenshots of their victim's account information were neatly stored on her laptop. It was as if they hadn't considered the possibility of being caught. Her carelessness became their undoing. She had been so preoccupied with her newfound life of deceit and infidelity that she hadn't even bothered to clean up after herself. Every file, every message, was there, waiting to be discovered. As I closed the laptop, my anger turned to resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. They had hurt countless others, and it was time for them to face the consequences. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. Thankfully, he picked up on the first ring. I explained everything as succinctly as I could, detailing the scam, the financial theft, and the evidence I had found. He listened intently, his tone growing more serious with every word. "We need to meet," he said firmly. "Bring everything you have." I agreed and set a time for later that day. As I hung up the phone, I glanced back at the laptop, its screen dark now, but still a glaring reminder of everything that had been lost. My marriage, my trust, my financial security, all of it had been shattered by the very person who should have protected it. But as devastating as it was, I knew one thing: this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a fight to take back what was mine and to ensure they never did this to anyone else again. Once all the evidence had been gathered, the pieces fell into place with startling clarity. My attorney and I worked tirelessly to build a solid case against the scam operation. The evidence from the laptop, combined with financial records and witness statements, painted a damning picture of their activities. We presented everything to the authorities, and it didn't take long for them to act. The wheels of justice turned quickly, fueled by the overwhelming amount of proof we had. One of the key players, the man from the couple, was still in the hospital recovering from his injury. The police wasted no time interrogating him once we filed charges. Cornered and unable to deny the mountain of evidence against him, he cracked under pressure. During his confession, he laid out their entire operation, implicating my wife, her friend, and the rest of the group. His statements aligned perfectly with the information we had uncovered, solidifying the case even further. Their plan had been simple yet bold: wait for the man to recover, then disappear before anyone could catch them. They had underestimated me, assuming I'd stay silent or move on. Instead, my determination to hold them accountable caught them off guard. Their overconfidence proved to be their undoing, and within days, warrants were issued for everyone involved. Police apprehended the remaining members of the group, including my wife's so-called friend, who had been instrumental in coordinating their scams. The fallout was swift and severe. My wife, now under arrest, was granted one phone call. Of all people, she chose to call me. When I picked up, I was met with an angry tirade. She screamed about how terrible I was for betraying her, for not letting her go, and ruining her life. The irony was almost too much to bear. Here was the woman who had cheated on me, stolen my money, and participated in a scam that hurt countless others, now playing the victim. I didn't let her finish. I hung up, her curses still ringing in my ears. It was a small, petty victory, but one I didn't regret. With her in custody, I turned my focus to the next step: divorce. My attorney guided me through the process, and with the evidence we had, it was a relatively straightforward case. The court had no trouble granting me the upper hand. The recordings, the financial proof, and the blatant betrayal all worked in my favor. Because my wife had never held a steady job and most of our assets had been acquired before the marriage, I retained ownership of the house, the car, and the majority of our finances. The divorce was finalized quickly, leaving me free to rebuild my life. My ex-wife's situation, however, was far less fortunate. As the trial for the scam unfolded, it became clear that while she and her friend were deeply involved, their lawyers managed to secure lighter sentences for them. They argued that my wife and her friend were not fully aware of the scale of the scam, painting them as gullible participants rather than masterminds. The judge granted them conditional sentences and ankle monitors, ensuring they couldn't leave their homes without permission. It was frustrating to see them evade harsher punishment, but at least they were marked by their actions. The couple, however, wasn't so lucky. Their role as the orchestrators of the operation left no room for leniency. The evidence, combined with their hospital confession, sealed their fate. They were sentenced to significant prison time, ensuring they wouldn't have the chance to exploit anyone else for years to come. Watching them face justice was a moment of vindication, a small measure of closure after months of chaos. As the courtroom drama ended, I allowed myself a moment to breathe. It felt like the end of a long, grueling chapter. Yet, even as I walked away from the courthouse, a nagging feeling lingered. Something about the way my ex-wife had calmly accepted her ankle monitor, about the way her friend avoided eye contact during sentencing, unsettled me. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't truly over. They had escaped full accountability, and I suspected they wouldn't stay idle for long. The couple's imprisonment brought some relief, but it also left me wary. I knew how cunning they had been to build their operation in the first place, and I couldn't help but wonder what else they might have set in motion. As much as I wanted to move on, the shadow of their actions still loomed over me. And so, while one chapter had closed, another seemed poised to begin. Some time had passed, and my life had finally begun to settle into a new rhythm. I had moved on, found a wonderful new girlfriend, and taken the necessary steps to rebuild my sense of security. One of the first things I did was change the locks on my house, ensuring that any remnants of my old life couldn't slip back in uninvited. Things were good, stable even, and I dared to think that chapter of chaos was firmly behind me. Then, one evening, there was an unexpected knock at the door. I opened it to find my ex-wife standing there, no longer wearing the ankle monitor that had kept her tethered for months. She wasted no time launching into demands, claiming that since the house was once ours, she had every right to move back in. I didn't let her get far. "Get lost," I said firmly. "I've proven in court that this house is mine. Besides, I've moved on. I've got someone new, so why don't you find your way back to your lover in prison?" My words hit their mark. Her face twisted in fury as I calmly shut the door in her face. For several minutes, she pounded on the door, shouting obscenities and threats. My girlfriend, understandably shaken, stood by my side, uncertain of what might happen next. I reassured her, staying close until the commotion subsided. Eventually, my ex-wife's persistence wore out, and she stormed off into the night. The sound of her retreating footsteps was a relief, though the tension lingered in the air. From that day forward, my ex-wife didn't return. It was as if she finally understood that she no longer had any power over me or my life. My girlfriend and I continued to build our future together, leaving the shadows of the past firmly behind us. The peace that followed was something I cherished deeply, a reminder that no matter how turbulent life becomes, it is possible to move forward and find happiness again.
Mr. Thomas, a retired school teacher in the small town of Millbrook, spent his days tending his garden and volunteering at the local soup kitchen. Despite his fulfilling routine, he felt a lingering emptiness. One stormy evening, he encountered Alex, a 12-year-old boy, playing a broken guitar for spare change. Alex, having fled an abusive home, was hesitant but accepted Mr. Thomas's offer of shelter. Over time, they formed a deep bond, with Mr. Thomas enrolling Alex in school and supporting his musical talent. Through guidance and encouragement, Alex overcame his past and excelled, eventually being discovered by a talent scout. 5 years later, Alex dedicated his first concert to Mr. Thomas, sharing their inspiring story with the audience. Alex's success led him to create a foundation for homeless children. mirroring the kindness he received. In the end, Alex and Mr. Thomas reflected on their journey, content and proud. Hello, my friends. I hope all you are fine. This is Narrative Stories channel. Let's start this story. Mr. Thomas, a retired school teacher, spent his days in the serene, small town of Millbrook, where life moved at a gentle pace. Each morning, he would tend to his lush garden, where vibrant flowers and well-kept vegetables stood testament to his meticulous care. The rest of his day was dedicated to volunteering at the local soup kitchen, where his warm, welcoming presence provided comfort to those in need. Despite his fulfilling routine, Mr. Thomas couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of emptiness, a subtle void in his otherwise content life. On the other side of town, 12-year-old Alex navigated the harsh streets, his broken guitar his only companion. The guitar, though worn and battered, was his lifeline, a source of solace amidst the chaos of his existence. Alex had fled from an abusive home, seeking refuge in the anonymity of the streets. He spent his days playing music for spare change, his soulful melodies a stark contrast to the bleakness of his surroundings. Alex's eyes, although weary, held a spark of hope, a dream that someday his music might lead him to a better life. One stormy evening, as the rain poured relentlessly, Mr. Thomas spotted a small figure huddled under a bridge. The boy, drenched and shivering, clutched his guitar tightly. Compassion stirred within Mr. Thomas. Without a second thought, he approached Alex, offering a warm meal and shelter for the night. Alex hesitated, his eyes filled with suspicion, but the genuine kindness in Mr. Thomas's voice eventually broke through his defenses. That night, for the first time in months, Alex slept in a warm bed, a sense of safety washing over him. In the weeks that followed, Alex's wariness slowly began to dissolve. Mr. Thomas's unwavering kindness and patience fostered an atmosphere of trust. They spent hours talking, sharing stories of their lives. Alex learned about Mr. Thomas's years as a teacher, while Mr. Thomas discovered Alex's extraordinary musical talent. Every evening, Alex would play his guitar, and Mr. Thomas would listen, offering gentle praise and encouragement. A bond formed between them, deeper than mere friendship. It was a connection born out of mutual respect and care. Recognizing Alex's potential, Mr. Thomas took steps to secure a brighter future for him. He enrolled Alex in school, ensuring he received a proper education. Understanding the importance of nurturing Alex's musical gift, Mr. Thomas bought him a new guitar and arranged for private music lessons. The structured environment and consistent support allowed Alex to thrive. With each passing day, his confidence grew and his skills improved. The boy who once played for spare change now had the opportunity to chase his dreams. The journey was not without its challenges. Alex grappled with self-doubt and the haunting memories of his past. There were moments when the weight of his experiences seemed too much to bear. However, Mr. Thomas stood by him, offering wisdom and unwavering support. He taught Alex the value of perseverance and the strength that comes from overcoming adversity. Through this guidance, Alex learned to channel his emotions into his music, transforming his pain into powerful, moving performances. The growth he experienced was profound, both as a musician and as a person. 5 years later, Alex had become a remarkable young man. He excelled in school, earning accolades for both his academic achievements and his musical talent. His performances at local events garnered attention, and his reputation as a gifted musician began to spread. Alex's hard work and dedication paid off when a talent scout discovered him during a local music festival. The opportunity was a turning point, a chance to step onto a larger stage and share his gift with the world. Recognizing Alex's potential, Mr. Thomas took steps to secure a brighter future for him. He enrolled Alex in school, ensuring he received a proper education. Understanding the importance of nurturing Alex's musical gift, Mr. Thomas bought him a new guitar and arranged for private music lessons. The structured environment and consistent support allowed Alex to thrive. With each passing day, his confidence grew, and his skills improved. The boy who once played for spare change now had the opportunity to chase his dreams. The journey was not without its challenges. Alex grappled with self-doubt and the haunting memories of his past. There were moments when the weight of his experiences seemed too much to bear. However, Mr. Thomas stood by him, offering wisdom and unwavering support. He taught Alex the value of perseverance and the strength that comes from overcoming adversity. Through this guidance, Alex learned to channel his emotions into his music, transforming his pain into powerful, moving performances. The growth he experienced was profound, both as a musician and as a person. 5 years later, Alex had become a remarkable young man. He excelled in school, earning accolades for both his academic achievements and his musical talent. His performances at local events garnered attention, and his reputation as a gifted musician began to spread. Alex's hard work and dedication paid off when a talent scout discovered him during a local music festival. The opportunity was a turning point, a chance to step onto a larger stage and share his gift with the world. Alex was offered a record deal and the chance to perform at a prestigious concert hall. The preparation was intense, but Alex approached it with the same determination that had carried him through his hardships. He practiced tirelessly, fine-tuning every note and perfecting his performance. On the night of his debut concert, the anticipation was palpable. The concert hall buzzed with excitement, the audience eager to witness the young prodigy's first major performance. As Alex took the stage, he felt a surge of emotion. Standing before the crowd, he dedicated his performance to Mr. Thomas, the man who had changed his life. He shared their story, his voice filled with gratitude and love. The audience listened in rapt silence, moved by the tale of kindness and redemption. When Alex began to play, his music resonated with a depth and passion that captivated everyone present. The concert was a resounding success, marking the beginning of Alex's promising career. After the concert, Alex and Mr. Thomas shared a quiet moment backstage. They reflected on their journey, the challenges they had overcome, and the bond they had forged. There were tears of joy and pride, a testament to the profound impact they had on each other's lives. Mr. Thomas, once a lonely retiree, had found purpose in helping Alex, while Alex had discovered a family and a future through Mr. Thomas's kindness. Inspired by Mr. Thomas's generosity, Alex decided to give back to the community that had once been his refuge. He established a foundation dedicated to helping homeless children through music. The foundation provided instruments, lessons, and support, offering hope to those who needed it most. Alex's efforts mirrored the compassion he had received, creating a legacy of kindness and opportunity. The story concludes with a serene scene in Mr. Thomas's garden. Alex and Mr. Thomas sit side by side, the golden light of the setting sun casting a warm glow around them. Alex strums his guitar, the notes carrying a sense of peace and fulfillment. They are content, proud of their journey, and the lives they have touched. The garden, once a symbol of Mr. Thomas's solitude, now blooms with the joy and love they have cultivated together. Thank you for being a part of Narrative Stories. Your support and engagement mean the world to us. We are committed to bringing you the best in storytelling. What kinds of stories would you like to see next? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
Welcome to another story on Cheating Tales Lab. We're so happy to have you here, and today's story is one we think you'll really enjoy. So without further ado, let's begin. Zephyr Blackwood's keys jangled as he fumbled with the lock. A bouquet of blue orchids cradled in one arm and a small velvet box tucked securely in his pocket. The house was unnaturally quiet as he stepped inside, the silence pressing against his ears like a physical force. "Lyra," he called out, his voice echoing through the empty rooms. No answer. Something was off. Zephyr's eyes darted around, taking in the subtle signs of disturbance. A photo frame lay face down on the side table, its usual place marred by its absence. As he moved further into the house, the wrongness intensified. In the kitchen, Lyra's favorite mug lay shattered on the floor, its pieces scattered like fallen stars. Her purse sat abandoned on the counter, its contents undisturbed. The orchids suddenly felt heavy in his hands, their delicate petals a mockery of the celebration he'd anticipated. Zephyr's heart raced as he made his way to the living room. Lyra's phone rested on the coffee table, its screen a web of cracks. He picked it up gingerly, as if it might bite him. The cracks spread outward from the center, like the tendrils of a sinister conspiracy reaching into his life. With trembling fingers, he pulled out his own phone and dialed Iris Zhao's number. Lyra's best friend picked up on the third ring, her voice pitched oddly high. "Hello? Zephyr? Iris, have you seen Lyra? She's not home, and things look strange." There was a pause, too long to be natural. "And no, I haven't seen her. Is everything okay?" Zephyr's suspicion grew with each stuttered word. Iris was hiding something, her usual poise crumbling under the weight of whatever secret she was keeping. "Are you sure? You haven't heard from her at all?" "I'm sorry, Zephyr. I really don't know where she is." The words tumbled out too quickly, each one another brick in the wall of deception. After hanging up, Zephyr found himself in their bedroom, drawn there by some instinct he couldn't name. His eyes fell on Lyra's jewelry box, an ornate wooden thing they bought on their honeymoon. Something niggled at the back of his mind. He opened it, fingers tracing the familiar contours. Then he paused. Was that a seam where there shouldn't be one? Pressing gently, he felt a click, and a false bottom sprang open. Inside lay a burner phone, its cheap plastic a stark contrast to Lyra's elegant jewelry. Zephyr's hand shook as he turned it on. The messages that filled the screen were in a code he didn't recognize, a fact that chilled him to the bone. He was a top cryptographer, for God's sake. If he couldn't crack it at a glance. The shrill ring of his phone cut through his thoughts like a knife. Detective Nolan Frost's gruff voice filled his ear before he could even say hello. "Mr. Blackwood, we found your wife barely alive in a motel. You need to come now." The words hit Zephyr like a physical blow. He stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the dresser. "What happened? Is she—" "Just get here," Frost interrupted, his tone grim. "There's more to this than meets the eye." As Zephyr rushed out the door, the velvet box fell from his pocket forgotten. The sapphire necklace inside glinted in the fading light, a testament to the love he thought he knew. The Starlight Motel loomed before Zephyr, its neon sign flickering weakly in the twilight. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burnt rubber and gasoline, a pungent cocktail that made his stomach churn. Police cars formed a barrier around the scene, their lights painting the world in alternating flashes of red and blue. An ambulance stood nearby, its back doors open like the maw of some patient beast. And there, wrapped around a lamppost like some grotesque modern art installation, was a mangled red Porsche. Detective Frost materialized out of the chaos, his weathered face a mask of grim determination. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, nodding in greeting. "Your wife was in an accident with Caspian Vex, her ex from college. He was driving under the influence." Zephyr's mind reeled. Caspian Vex? Lyra had never mentioned him. Frost's next words hit even harder. "But there's more to this than meets the eye, Mr. Blackwood." Before Zephyr could press for details, movement caught his eye. Paramedics were wheeling out a stretcher, and on it lay Lyra. Her face was pale, marred by ugly bruises that stood out like accusatory fingers pointing at some unseen culprit. Their eyes met across the chaos of the crime scene. Lyra reached out weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Honey, I'm so sorry. It was an accident." The words seemed to carry a weight beyond their simple meaning, laden with secrets and lies. Zephyr turned away, unable to bear the sight of her. His gaze fell on a briefcase among the scattered debris, its contents spilling out onto the asphalt. He caught glimpses of what looked like classified documents before a uniformed officer hurried to gather them up. As he made his way back to his car, a hushed conversation between two paramedics reached his ears. "Did you see those badges? High-level clearance, man." "Yeah, and those encrypted hard drives? What the hell were they doing here?" Zephyr's mind whirled, pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to take shape. What had Lyra gotten herself into? And more importantly, what had she dragged him into along with her? The sterile corridors of the National Cyber Defense Agency headquarters seemed colder than usual as Zephyr made his way to his office. The events of the past few hours had left him feeling like a stranger in his own life. With practiced ease, he bypassed the standard security protocols and accessed the agency's personnel files. His fingers flew over the keyboard, searching for a name he'd never thought he'd need to know. Caspian Vex. There it was. Hired 3 months ago as a cybersecurity consultant. Zephyr's eyes narrowed. It was a vague title, the kind used when someone needed access but didn't want to draw attention. Red flags unfurled in his mind, each one a warning he'd failed to heed. Burning the midnight oil? Zephyr nearly jumped out of his skin. Raven Coe stood in the doorway, her sharp eyes taking in his disheveled appearance and the classified files on his screen. Raven, He hesitated, weighing his options. Then, making a decision, he gestured for her to come in. I need your help, but this stays between us. In a secure room, away from prying eyes and ears, Zephyr laid out the situation. Raven listened, her brilliant mind already connecting dots he hadn't even seen. We need to look at the access logs, she said, her fingers dancing across a keyboard. If what you're saying is true, there should be a pattern. Hours passed in a blur of code and caffeine. As the first rays of dawn crept through the windows, they had their answer. A series of minor but strategic security breaches over the past 6 months, all traced back to Zephyr's credentials. But the timestamps. I wasn't even in the building for some of these, Zephyr muttered. Raven's voice was grim. Someone's been using your access, and doing a damn good job of covering their tracks. They dug deeper, following digital breadcrumbs through the labyrinth of the agency's systems. And then they found it. Fragmented connections between Caspian Vex and chatter about a group known as the Cypher Syndicate on the dark web. I've heard whispers about them, Raven said, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. They're planning something big, a cyber attack that could cripple entire nations. The implications hit Zephyr like a physical blow. Lyra had been using their marriage as a cover, feeding classified information to the Cypher Syndicate through Caspian. But why? What could possibly drive her to betray not just him, but their entire nation? With trembling hands, he pulled out the burner phone he'd found in Lyra's jewelry box. The encrypted messages that had baffled him earlier now seemed to mock him with their secrets. Can you break this? He asked Raven, handing her the phone. Her eyes lit up with the challenge. Give me an hour. 53 minutes later, Raven's triumphant cry broke the tense silence. I'm in. Zephyr leaned over her shoulder, his heart pounding. As the decrypted messages filled the screen, he felt the last remnants of his world crumble around him. Lyra wasn't just having an affair or stealing information. She was a deep-cover operative for the Cypher Syndicate, planted years ago to infiltrate the agency through him. Their entire relationship, their marriage, their life together, it had all been a lie. As the weight of the betrayal crashed over him, Zephyr gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles turning white. He'd thought he was living a love story. Instead, he'd been an unwitting pawn in a game of international espionage. And now, it was time to change the rules. The antiseptic smell of the hospital corridor assaulted Zephyr's nostrils as he made his way to Lyra's room. A manila envelope containing divorce papers was tucked under his arm, its weight a constant reminder of the betrayal that had shattered his world. Room 307. Zephyr paused at the door, steeling himself for what lay ahead. He pushed it open, the hinges squeaking softly as if protesting the intrusion. The sterile whiteness of the hospital room was a stark contrast to the warmth their home once held. Lyra lay in the bed, looking small and vulnerable in her hospital gown. Her eyes widened as she saw him, a mix of emotions flashing across her face. Relief, fear, and something else Zephyr couldn't quite place. Zephyr, she began, her voice cracking. I can explain. He cut her off with a raised hand, his face an impassive mask. Without a word, He placed a manila envelope on her bedside table. The soft thud it made seemed to echo in the silence of the room. Lyra's eyes darted to the envelope, then back to Zephyr. Understanding dawned on her face, followed quickly by panic. "Please, just let me." The door opened again, cutting off her plea. Caspian Vex sauntered in, his arm in a sling and a nasty gash running across his forehead. The smug grin on his face faltered slightly as he registered Zephyr's presence. "Well, well," Caspian drawled, recovering quickly. "If it isn't the man of the hour." Zephyr's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists at his sides. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Caspian's next words hit like a sledgehammer. "I suppose introductions are in order. Zephyr Blackwood. Meet Lyra's handler in the Cipher Syndicate." "Oh, wait, that's me." Lyra's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room. Zephyr's mind raced, processing this new information. He'd suspected, of course, but hearing it confirmed so brazenly. "What do you want?" Zephyr managed to grit out, his voice low and dangerous. Caspian's smirk widened. "Straight to business. I like that." He lowered himself into a chair, wincing slightly as the movement jostled his injured arm. "We want your cooperation, Zephyr. Your expertise, your access. In return, we don't expose certain indiscretions from your past." Zephyr's blood ran cold. How could they possibly know about... "That's right," Caspian continued, clearly enjoying himself. "Lyra here discovered a rather interesting ethical breach from your early days at the agency. Wouldn't want that getting out, would we?" Zephyr's face remained impassive, but his mind was working overtime. He needed time, needed to think. I need some time to consider this," he said, allowing a hint of vulnerability to creep into his voice. Caspian nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Take all the time you need. We'll be in touch." As Zephyr turned to leave, his hand brushed against the get-well card in his pocket. In one smooth motion, he placed it on Lyra's bedside table, right next to the divorce papers. The high-tech listening device hidden within would pick up every word spoken in this room. With a final, inscrutable look at Lyra, Zephyr walked out, the first step of his counter-strategy set in motion. The game was on, and he intended to win. Artemis Steele's office was a fortress within a fortress. Zephyr had been here countless times before, but never like this. Never with the weight of betrayal and conspiracy hanging over his head. Director Steele herself was a formidable presence, her sharp eyes seeming to pierce right through him as he laid out everything he'd uncovered. The burner phone, the security breaches, the Cipher Syndicate, Lyra's true identity. He held nothing back. As he finished his report, Steele leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled under her chin. The silence stretched on, broken only by the soft ticking of an antique clock on the wall. Finally, she spoke. "This goes deeper than we ever imagined." Her eyes narrowed as she absorbed the information. "We need to turn this to our advantage." Zephyr nodded, relieved that she believed him. "What do you suggest, Director?" A slow, predatory smile spread across Steele's face. "We make you a double agent, Mr. Blackwood. Feed false information to Lyra and Caspian. Use them to unravel the entire Cipher Syndicate operation from the inside out." The plan was daring, dangerous, and exactly what Zephyr had hoped for. "I'm in," he said without hesitation. Over the next few weeks, Zephyr lived a precarious double life. To Lyra and Caspian, he appeared to be a reluctant accomplice, sharing carefully selected tidbits of classified information. Each piece of data was meticulously crafted misinformation, designed to mislead the Cipher Syndicate while appearing valuable on the surface. Lyra, now out of the hospital, watched him with a mix of suspicion and hope. Zephyr played his part to perfection, allowing just enough reluctance and resentment to show through to make his cooperation believable. Caspian, for his part, seemed to revel in his perceived victory. His smug grins and condescending pats on the back made Zephyr's skin crawl. But he endured it all for the sake of the mission. One night, as Zephyr sat in his darkened living room, monitoring the feed from the listening device he'd planted in Lyra's hospital room. He overheard a conversation that chilled him to the bone. "Everything's going according to plan." Lyra's voice came through, tinny but clear. "Zephyr's cooperating, just like you said he would." "Good," a gruff male voice replied. Zephyr's breath caught in his throat as he recognized it. Detective Nolan Frost. "Keep him in line. We can't afford any slip-ups this close to the endgame." Zephyr's mind reeled. Detective Frost, the man in charge of investigating the motel incident, was on the Cypher Syndicate's payroll. The conspiracy ran deeper than he had ever imagined. As the days wore on, the toll of his deception began to show. Dark circles appeared under his eyes. His movements became jittery and unpredictable. Raven, ever observant, couldn't help but notice. "Zephyr," she said one day, cornering him in a secure room at the NCDA. "What's going on with you? And don't tell me it's nothing. I know you better than that." For a moment, Zephyr considered brushing her off, but the concern in her eyes, the genuine worry in her voice, broke through his defenses. In a moment of vulnerability, he found himself confiding in her about the emotional turmoil he was experiencing. "I feel like I'm losing myself," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every lie, every piece of false information I feed them, it's like I'm chipping away at who I am." Raven listened silently, her presence a comforting anchor in the storm of his emotions. When he finished, she placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding him. "You're not losing yourself," she said firmly. "You're fighting for what's right, even when it's hard. That's who you are, Zephyr. Don't ever forget that." Her words, simple yet powerful, gave Zephyr the strength to continue. As he navigated this treacherous path, Raven's support became his lifeline, a reminder of why he was fighting in the first place. The abandoned subway station loomed before Zephyr, its entrance a gaping maw in the side of a decrepit building. Graffiti covered every available surface, and the air was thick with the musty smell of decay and neglect. Zephyr adjusted his glasses, ensuring the hidden camera was in place. The live stream to the secure NCDA server was already running, capturing every detail of this clandestine meeting with the Cypher Syndicate leaders. As he descended into the bowels of the station, the dank atmosphere closed in around him. Flickering lights cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the sound of dripping water echoed ominously in the distance. The syndicate members were already gathered, their faces partially obscured by the poor lighting. Zephyr recognized Caspian and Lyra among them, along with a few others he'd seen in surveillance photos. As the meeting progressed, Zephyr's blood ran cold. The syndicate's ultimate plan was far more ambitious and devastating than anyone had anticipated. They intended to crash the global financial market using stolen algorithms, creating worldwide economic chaos on an unprecedented scale. Zephyr kept his face impassive as he absorbed this information, but inside, his mind was racing. The implications were staggering. Millions of lives would be affected, entire nations brought to their knees. He knew then that the stakes of his mission had just been raised exponentially. In the days that followed, Lyra made several attempts to rekindle their relationship. Her touches, once a source of comfort and joy, now felt like poison on Zephyr's skin. Her words of love and regret rang hollow in his ears. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered one night, her hand on his arm. "You have to believe me, Zephyr. Everything I've done, it was for a greater cause." Zephyr played along, forcing himself to respond with just the right mix of hesitation and lingering affection. All the while, he documented every interaction, building a case that would eventually bring the entire syndicate crashing down. Caspian, meanwhile, grew increasingly paranoid. Zephyr often caught him watching with narrowed eyes, as if trying to peer into his very thoughts. "I want round-the-clock surveillance on Blackwood," Caspian barked at one of his underlings. "If he so much as sneezes, I want to know about it." This new level of scrutiny complicated Zephyr's covert activities. Communication with Director Steele and Raven became a dangerous game of cat and mouse. He found himself employing ever more creative methods to pass along crucial information without detection. Late one night, as Zephyr was in the middle of transmitting a particularly sensitive piece of intel to Director Steele, disaster nearly struck. The door to his office began to open, the handle turning agonizingly slowly. Zephyr's heart pounded in his chest as he scrambled to hide the evidence of his true allegiance. Just as the door swung open, revealing one of Caspian's men, Raven's voice came through on the intercom. "Zephyr, I need you in the lab right away. We've got a situation with the firewall." The syndicate member hesitated, then grudgingly allowed Zephyr to leave. As he hurried down the corridor, Zephyr sent a silent thank you to Raven for her perfectly timed intervention. Later, as he pored over some of the syndicate's encrypted communications, Zephyr made a chilling discovery. Hidden within the complex codes and ciphers was evidence suggesting that the Cipher Syndicate had infiltrated the highest levels of government. But it was the next revelation that truly shook him to his core. As he dug deeper, following a trail of digital breadcrumbs, he uncovered something that made his blood run cold. The evidence pointed to a mole within the upper echelons of the NCDA itself. Zephyr sat back in his chair, his mind reeling from the implications. The enemy wasn't just out there. It was here, within the very walls he'd sworn to protect. As he stared at the damning evidence on his screen, one thought echoed through his mind. Who could he trust now? The air in the NCDA's secure conference room crackled with tension. Zephyr Blackwood stood at the head of the table, his eyes hard as flint as he surveyed the small group of trusted operatives before him. Director Artemis Steele sat to his right, her face an impassive mask that betrayed nothing of the high-stakes game they were about to play. "Ladies and gentlemen," Zephyr began, his voice low and steady, "what I'm about to propose is not only dangerous but technically illegal. If anyone wants to leave now, there will be no repercussions." No one moved. Zephyr nodded, a grim smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Good. Let's begin." Over the next hour, Zephyr laid out the bones of an elaborate sting operation. The centerpiece? A fictitious quantum encryption server that would supposedly house the world's most sensitive financial data. "We're going to create a honeypot so sweet the Cipher Syndicate won't be able to resist," Zephyr explained, his fingers dancing across a holographic display as he spoke. "This server will be our bait, our trap, and our key to bringing down the entire operation." Director Steele leaned forward, her sharp eyes narrowing as she absorbed the details. "And how do you propose we leak this information without arousing suspicion?" Zephyr's smile was cold. "Through me. I'll feed the information to Lyra and Caspian, bit by tantalizing bit. They think they have me under their thumb. It's time we use that to our advantage." As the meeting progressed, the plan took shape. Carefully controlled leaks, strategically placed vulnerabilities, all designed to draw the Cipher Syndicate into a trap of the NCDA's making. Over the next few weeks, Zephyr became a master of misdirection. Every conversation with Lyra, every clandestine meeting with Caspian, became an opportunity to drop hints about the quantum encryption server. "I overheard something interesting today," Zephyr would say, his voice carefully modulated to sound both nervous and excited. "A new server, supposed to be unhackable. It's got everyone at the agency on edge." He watched as the bait was taken, hook, line, and sinker. The Cipher Syndicate mobilized their most skilled hackers, pouring resources into cracking what they believed to be the ultimate prize. Zephyr stood in the shadows of the NCDA's main server room, watching as technicians scurried about, setting up the elaborate ruse. Fake servers hummed, their blinking lights a testament to the agency's attention to detail. Everything had to be perfect. The slightest inconsistency could blow the entire operation. As he observed the controlled chaos, a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Zephyr." He turned to see Lyra approaching, Caspian close behind. Their faces were masks of determination and barely concealed greed. "We need access to the server room," Lyra said, her voice low and urgent. "The quantum encryption server. You're going to get us in." Zephyr felt a chill run down his spine. This was it, the endgame. He nodded slowly, playing the part of the reluctant accomplice to perfection. "All right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But after this, we're done. I want out." Caspian's laugh was cold and mirthless. "Oh, Zephyr, you're in this for the long haul now. There's no getting out." As Zephyr led them towards the heart of the trap, he couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. Something was off. The syndicate's movement seemed too precise, too well-informed. It was as if they knew exactly where to step to avoid the NCDA's carefully laid snares. A chilling realization struck him like a physical blow. There was a mole on his team. Someone privy to the details of the sting operation was feeding information to the syndicate. As he punched in the access code to the server room, Zephyr's mind raced. The trap was sprung, but who was really caught in its jaws? He had mere moments to identify the traitor and salvage the operation before everything fell apart. The heavy door swung open with a soft hiss, revealing the blinking lights and humming servers within. As Lyra and Caspian stepped eagerly into the room, Zephyr's hand hovered over the concealed panic button in his pocket. One press, and the entire building would go into lockdown. But before he could act, a voice from behind froze him in his tracks. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Blackwood." Zephyr turned slowly, his blood running cold as he recognized the speaker. The pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicked into place, revealing a picture far more twisted than he could have imagined. The server room, once a sanctuary of order and control, had become a battleground. Zephyr's mind raced, processing the unfolding chaos with the cold precision of the master cryptographer he was. The syndicate's uncanny knowledge of their countermeasures suddenly made horrifying sense. Zephyr's eyes darted around the room, cataloging every face, every micro-expression. The mole was here, in this very room. But who? A bead of sweat trickled down his spine as he realized the magnitude of the situation. The entire operation was unraveling faster than he could patch the holes. He was going to have to improvise, relying on years of experience and the razor-sharp instincts honed through countless cyber battles. "Impressive setup, Zephyr." Caspian's voice dripped with smug satisfaction. "Almost had us fooled. Almost." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes cold and calculating. Gone was the vulnerability she'd shown in the hospital. This was the real Lyra, the deep-cover operative who had played him for years. "Did you really think we wouldn't see through your little charade?" she asked, her voice like silk over steel. Zephyr's retort died on his lips as a new figure entered the fray. Detective Nolan Frost sauntered into the server room, a predatory grin on his weathered face. "Surprised to see me, Blackwood?" Frost chuckled. "You should have dug a little deeper into that motel incident. Might have saved you some trouble." The trio converged on Zephyr, backing him against the humming servers. They thought they had won, their victory assured by treachery and deceit. But Zephyr Blackwood was far from beaten. "You're right," he said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "I should have dug deeper. Into all of you." With a swift motion, Zephyr pulled out a small device from his pocket. The syndicate members tensed, expecting a weapon. Instead, a holographic display flickered to life, filling the air with streams of data. "What you're seeing," Zephyr explained, his confidence growing with each word, "is every piece of intelligence I've gathered on the Cypher Syndicate over the past weeks. Every conversation, every transaction, every dirty little secret." Caspian's face drained of color. Lyra's eyes widened in disbelief. Frost's hand inched towards his concealed weapon. "The real sting operation," Zephyr continued, "was layers deep. This server room, it's a sophisticated containment system. The moment you stepped inside, you activated a dormant protocol. We're locked in, and every word you say is being recorded and transmitted to law enforcement agencies worldwide." The realization of their predicament dawned on the syndicate members' faces. They had walked right into a trap far more intricate than they could have imagined. Lyra, ever the quick thinker, made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Her face softened, tears welling up in her eyes. "Zephyr, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "What we had, it wasn't all a lie. I grew to love you. Truly, we can still have a life together. Just give me a chance to explain. For a moment, just a fleeting instant, Zephyr's resolve wavered. The memory of happier times, of a love he thought was real, threatened to overwhelm him. But then he remembered the betrayal, the years of lies, the lives put at risk for the syndicate's twisted ambitions. His expression hardened. "No, Lyra," he said, his voice cold. "We can't." With a subtle hand motion, Zephyr activated the final phase of his countermove. Alarms blared throughout the building as armed NCDA agents began to swarm towards their location. Panic erupted in the server room. Caspian lunged for the door, only to find it sealed shut. Frost drew his weapon, his eyes darting wildly for an escape route. Lyra stood frozen, the full weight of her actions finally crashing down upon her. In the chaos, the three managed to slip past Zephyr, making a break for the emergency stairwell. They disappeared through the door, just as the first NCDA agents rounded the corner. Zephyr gave chase, his intimate knowledge of the building's layout guiding his pursuit. The hunt was on, and he was determined to see it through to the bitter end. Rain lashed against the windows of the NCDA headquarters as Zephyr tore through the labyrinthine corridors. His footsteps echoed off the sterile walls, mingling with the distant shouts of agents and the wail of alarms. He could hear them ahead, Lyra, Caspian, and Frost, their desperation palpable in the frantic pounding of their feet. But Zephyr had the home field advantage. He'd walked these halls countless times, knew every shortcut and hidden passage. As they approached a T-junction, Zephyr cut left, taking a maintenance corridor that would bring him out ahead of the fleeing trio. He burst through a door just as they rounded the corner, nearly colliding with Caspian. The look of shock on their faces was almost comical. Almost. "End of the line," Zephyr panted, blocking their path. Frost raised his weapon, but Lyra pushed his arm down. "No, there's still a way out. The roof." They turned and ran, leaving Zephyr to give chase once more. Up they went, flight after flight of stairs, the storm growing louder with each floor they climbed. Finally, they burst onto the roof. The rain came down in sheets, drenching them instantly. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the scene in stark, electric blue. Lyra spun to face Zephyr, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes wild. "Zephyr, please," she shouted over the howling wind. "You have to listen to me. I'm pregnant. It's yours." The words hit Zephyr like a physical blow. He faltered, his mind reeling. Could it be true? After everything, could there be an innocent life caught in the crossfire of their deception? Caspian seized the moment of distraction. "Enough of this shit," he snarled, pulling out a small remote. With the press of a button, the whir of rotors cut through the storm. A helicopter rose into view, hovering at the edge of the roof. Their escape route. "It's over, Zephyr," Frost called out, already moving towards a chopper. "You lost. Accept it." But Zephyr wasn't done. Not by a long shot. As Lyra and Caspian made for the helicopter, Zephyr reached into his pocket and activated a device of his own. To anyone watching, it would have looked like he was simply letting them go. They didn't know that every word spoken in that helicopter would be broadcast to law enforcement agencies worldwide. Their escape vehicle had become a flying confession booth. Zephyr stood in the rain, watching as the helicopter lifted off into the stormy night. Water streamed down his face, indistinguishable from the tears he refused to acknowledge. A hand on his shoulder startled him. He turned to see Director Steele, her usually immaculate suit soaked through, her eyes glinting with a fierce pride. "It's done," Zephyr said, his voice barely audible over the fading sound of rotors. "They thought they could use me, betray me, and walk away. But they underestimated what I'm capable of. This is the price of their deceit." Steele nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "Come on," she said gently. "Let's get you inside. There's still work to be done." As they turned to leave the roof, Zephyr cast one last look at the storm-tossed sky. The helicopter was gone, swallowed by the night. But he knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where the echoes of betrayal would resound through the digital realm, changing the landscape of cybersecurity forever. With a deep breath, Zephyr squared his shoulders and followed Steele back into the building. The storm raged on, but within him, a calm had settled. He had faced his betrayers, confronted his past, and emerged stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them. The war against the Cypher Syndicate was far from over, but tonight, Zephyr Blackwood had struck a decisive blow, and he would not rest until the last echoes of their betrayal had been silenced. The federal courthouse loomed before Zephyr Blackwood, its imposing facade a stark reminder of the gravity of the proceedings about to unfold within. 2 months had passed since that rain-soaked confrontation on the NCDA rooftop, but the weight of those events still pressed heavily upon his shoulders. As he ascended the steps, cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. Zephyr kept his gaze forward, his face an impassive mask. He was the star witness in the trial against the Cypher Syndicate, and the world was watching. The courtroom fell silent as Zephyr took the stand. His eyes swept across the room, landing on Lyra and Caspian. They sat among the other arrested syndicate members, their prison jumpsuits a far cry from the polished personas they once projected. Lyra's gaze met his, a mixture of defiance and something else, regret perhaps? Caspian, on the other hand, glared with undisguised hatred. Over the next several days, Zephyr's testimony unfolded like a complex algorithm. He presented decrypted communications, detailed financial trails, and played the damning confessions recorded from the Rig helicopter. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the syndicate's coffin, exposing the full extent of their operations. The media dubbed it the trial of the century. Zephyr's dual role as victim and hero captivated the public imagination. Despite the intense pressure and scrutiny, he remained composed, his testimony clear and unwavering. During a recess, Zephyr found himself alone in a private chamber, his mind still racing from the morning's cross-examination. The door opened, and Lyra was escorted in by a guard. Her eyes, once so familiar, now seemed to belong to a stranger. "Zephyr," she began, her voice soft, "I know you probably won't believe me, but I need you to know. What I told you on the roof about being pregnant, it wasn't entirely a lie. I thought I was at the time." Zephyr's face remained impassive. "I know the truth, Lyra. I saw your medical records from the hospital after the crash. You were never pregnant." The color drained from Lyra's face as she realized her final deception had been unraveled before it even began. Without another word, she was led away, leaving Zephyr alone with the echoes of her lies. When the verdict finally came down, it fell like a hammer blow. Caspian, identified as a key syndicate operative, was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. Lyra, despite her attempts to paint herself as a reluctant participant, received 25 years. The syndicate's leader, a shadowy figure finally unmasked, was given a life sentence. In the aftermath of the trial, as the dust began to settle, Zephyr found himself at a crossroads. An offer had been extended, the chance to lead a new international cybersecurity task force. It was an opportunity to be at the forefront of preventing future cyber threats, to turn his painful experience into a force for good. As he pondered the decision, Zephyr found himself standing before the NCDA's memorial wall. A new name had been added since he last visited Raven Coe, his friend and colleague. Fatally wounded while protecting him during the final confrontation with the syndicate, he placed a hand on her name, his touch gentle, almost reverent. "I'll make it count, Raven," he whispered. "I promise." Weeks later, Zephyr stood before the newly formed International Cyber Defense Coalition in Geneva. As he prepared to address the assembly and accept his new role, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The betrayal had nearly broken him, but it had also forged him into someone stronger, someone capable of protecting others from experiencing the same pain. Zephyr stepped up to the podium, his gaze sweeping across the gathered dignitaries and cybersecurity experts. When he spoke, his voice was steady, filled with conviction. Ladies and gentlemen, the digital realm is our new front line. And on this front line, trust is both our greatest vulnerability and our strongest asset. Today, we start building a safer digital future, a future where betrayal cannot hide in the shadows of cyberspace. As his words resonated through the chamber, Zephyr felt a sense of purpose settle over him. He had transformed his personal tragedy into a powerful drive for global cybersecurity. The echoes of betrayal that had once threatened to destroy him had become the foundation of a new era of digital defense. In that moment, as he looked out over the faces of those who would join him in this fight, Zephyr Blackwood knew that this was just the beginning. The battle for the future of cyberspace lay ahead, and he was ready to lead the charge. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.